Channel, Britain's news channel.
Several people have been killed after a shooting in northern Germany last night.
Good morning to you. It's 6 o'clock on Friday, the 10th of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie. These are your top stories this morning.
And a quick warning, the following pictures do contain flashing images. A number of people have been killed and multiple others have been injured in Germany after a gunman stormed a Jehovah's Witness hall. We'll keep you updated throughout the morning with our Home and Security editor, Mark White.
Details of the new immigration bill emerging this week, of course, and the Prime Minister is now heading to Paris for crunch talks with the French President in a bid to get a handle on the small boats crisis. We'll be talking to the Foreign Secretary in about an hour. What would you like to ask him?
Well, this comes as our GB News People's Poll reveals a majority of voters agree with the government and think those arriving illegally across the Channel should be removed from the UK and blocked from returning. We'll be digesting and much more from our polling throughout the morning as Labour hold their 20-point lead in the polls.
And as ever, we would love to hear from you. Any questions for the Foreign Secretary, send them through. And also let us know how you are getting on with that weather where you are. Not so bad here from sort of South Midlands down so far this morning. But what about further north in the country? Do let us know. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Well, we start this morning with some breaking news overnight. Several people have been killed in a shooting in northern Germany. Police say the incident happened at around 9 p.m. last night at a Jehovah's Witness meeting hall in Hamburg. They say the gunman acted alone and is thought to be dead. Well, Holger Wellhen from the Hamburg police gave an update in the early hours of this morning.
The police were relatively close by and then went into the building quite quickly. The police officers who went in found people who may have been seriously injured by firearms, some of them fatally. The officers also heard a shot from the upper part of the building and went upstairs, where they also found a person. So far, we have no indication that any perpetrators fled. We now have to carry out the evaluation of the crime scene. At the moment, we have no clues about the victims. All we know is that several people have died here. Several people have been injured. They have been taken to hospitals. I cannot give any information on the background at the moment. This is all still speculation. All we know is that the event took place this evening. In what framework and what the tenor of the event was is still unclear. It happened in a building of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but the reasons are still completely unclear.
Es hat stattgefunden, aber die Hintergründe sind noch komplett unklar.
Well, of course, the police saying at the moment that they are not aware of any motive for this at all, which is going to be a huge concern. But there's a lot more detail to be sort of excavated from all of this, and we'll be joined by our Home and Security editor, Mark White, in the next hour, who's looking through this right now, and so he'll be able to bring you the very latest.
Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is set to meet French President Emmanuel Macron today in Paris. It will be the first summit between both countries in 5 years.
Now, leaders are expected to agree on a joint drive to try to prevent migrants crossing the Channel in small boats through a multi-year financing plan.
Well, this would mean Britain would pay millions of pounds to France yearly to ramp up patrols on French beaches. So what is Macron's price?
Well, Paris-based journalist Peter Allen joins us now. And it raises an awful lot of questions, Peter, as to exactly what they think they can achieve today.
Well, effectively, they are two countries, obviously, that are trying to renew the Entente Cordiale. It's gone through a very bad time over the last few years, not least of all because of the very fraught relationship between Conservative prime ministers in Britain and the incumbent president of the Fifth Republic, Emmanuel Macron. And Emmanuel Macron has been saying this week that this is a chance to renew a beautiful friendship. He's been sounding like Humphrey Bogart saying that. But of course, there are huge tensions below the surface, not least of all, as you say there, over immigration policy. Yes, I can report that the French are very keen to bring about a multi-year deal whereby the French accept plenty of British money to put more police on French beaches to try and stop small boats crossing the channel. 45,000 people got across from France to Britain last year. And the French, they're saying they're doing everything to try and stop that. Of course, they're happy to accept British money. The last acceptance was of £63 million. That was in November. So there's some kind of agreement there, but the disagreement comes with the overall thrust of British immigration policy. They're extremely unhappy at the French about this so-called returns policy, which would effectively, in very simple terms, see Britain just returning migrants to France once they arrive in Britain. French aren't happy with that at all. Emmanuel Macron saying that would be an EU decision, not a French decision. So one suspects he's not going to grant that to the British today. And things are going to be very, very tough for Rishi Sunak today.
Yes, I mean, the main thing that Rishi Sunak would be looking to do is that returns policy. And it looks as though there isn't going to be an agreement on that today. I mean, that's certainly what's being suggested in the papers. So how much of this is just political theatre? How much is it just these two leaders posturing on the world stage? I mean, how much can actually be achieved today if they don't agree on the fundamental issues?
Well, I think from the British side, there's likely to be a lot more posturing. I think Emmanuel Macron's got lots of domestic policies of his own, which are nothing to do with Britain at all. And, of course, he's got lots of immigration policies, which are nothing to do with Britain at all. That's easily forgotten. The situation in northern France, particularly, of course, around Calais, is something that is not massively discussed in France, would you believe it, considering how much it's discussed in Britain. But the French are resolute in their policies. Yes, they insist that they want to stop this hugely dangerous crossing between the northern France and Britain. Remember, it was less than 2 years ago that 32 people died in one day crossing the English Channel. But they're also resolute in saying that countries like Britain and France are countries of immigration. They're saying that France receives a lot more asylum applications than Britain. There were about 180 asylum applications here last year. There were 180,000, of course. There were far less in Britain. And they're arguing, of course, that France is also considers itself the home of human rights. And they have a lot of concerns generally about British immigration policy. This has been going on for many years, and they don't think Suella Braverman's new bill really helps. And in fact, a lot of them think it makes the situation a lot worse. My understanding is she's in Paris today as well. That's what the Élysée Palace briefed last night. And she'll be going head-to-head with the Interior Minister here, Gérald Darmanin.
But I mean, let's try and look on the positive side of this. So the fact that they are talking again, the fact that the current policy, as we understand it, is working to an extent. I mean, they're talking about 3,000 people crossing the Channel so far this year, but another 3,000 people who have been stopped from crossing the Channel. So in that sense, if they can extend on that success so far, that's got to be a positive thing, hasn't it?
Yes, potentially, of course. They are very optimistic. I have attended briefings with British diplomats here in Paris, as well as briefings at the Élysée Palace, and indeed the Interior Ministry here. And they say there's a lot of cooperation now in northern France. British officials, for example, British police, have started sitting in French control rooms so they can see exactly what the French are up to. They can't join the patrols, but they can watch the patrols and they can offer guidance. They can say, look, we need to put more French police on this beach or whatever. And there is some evidence that that is improving, also with the increasing funds that the French are asking the British for, and it looks as though the British are going to grant that. There will be more police on French beaches. Boots on the ground is the expression that's been used on both sides of the channel. So yes, from that point of view, there is some success, but the numbers are still huge, whatever happens, and we won't know for a few months, maybe even be years, before we see how much these new security policies are going to help. But the problem that remains here, inevitably, is what you actually do with thousands of people who don't particularly want to be in France and actually want to be in Britain. The French say endlessly that they can't lock all these people up. Of course they can't. They can't deport all these people. They tried at one stage returning them, that's the word, returns policy, to Belgium. That didn't work at all. Of course it didn't. Why? Because they just crossed back again within 5 minutes of the coach dropping them off in Belgium. Obviously, it's going to be a lot harder for returned migrants returning to France to get back to Britain, but they will still keep trying, and you can put as many police as you like along the Channel coast. But remember, that Channel coast is very, very big. It isn't just Calais. Yeah. It isn't just that small area around Calais and Dunkirk. It extends right down to Normandy and beyond. And there's still a hell of a lot of work to do.
Yeah, there is indeed. Peter Allen, really good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really interesting point there that Peter Allen made about attempts, because if you are caught by French police trying to get into a small boat and cross the channel, you're not arrested, you're just stopped from doing so at that attempt. So once the police move on, they just try again. Yeah.
They do tend to deflate the boats, don't they? Knife the boats and things, but even so, it's a big issue. If you've got any thoughts about that, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Now, it's time for the GB News' People's Poll. And the majority of GB viewers agree that people arriving in the UK illegally should be removed and blocked from returning. They agree with Suella Braverman's new policy.
Yes, but when asked about whether Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer can be trusted the most to manage the small boats crisis, 16% say Rishi Sunak, 14% say Keir Starmer, 40% say none of the leaders can be trusted to manage the crisis. Well, let's go over those findings with John Ashmore, editor at CapEx, who joins us in the studio. Morning to you, John.
Good morning.
In one respect, no surprise that the majority of people think this is a good idea in terms of the policy. Doesn't mean it's going to make it any easier to turn it into law.
No, and I think that's the problem, as always with these things. The devil's in the detail. You have so many different things you have to get through. First, there's the actual parliamentary timetable. You've got to get it through the Commons. I think pretty easy. All the Tory MPs are going to back it. But then getting it through the Lords, we have this process of ping-pong. Notwithstanding all the kind of practical issues with the policy itself, people say, well, if you want to send them to Rwanda, the Rwandan asylum system is tiny, so it's not going to take that many people. But I think the key point here is that it's about the so-called pull factors or incentives. So it's about sending a message to people that if you do come to Britain, you know, you won't have an easy time of it, and that the red carpet will not be laid out for you, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What did you make of what Peter Allen was saying, who seemed sort of a little bit surprised, in a sense, that obviously there will not be an agreement today between about sending people back to France? Now, you can understand the French position on that, but both sides have said that won't happen today. But isn't the argument with this policy that actually it's not about sending them back to France, it's just about sending them to another safe location?
Yeah, I mean, this is another of the kind of practical issues, is that we don't have agreements in place with enough places to do that. I mean, there's different things. It depends what country you're from. As the government has said, we have an agreement with Albania, and a lot of the people coming on small boats are apparently from Albania. There have been surveys of people. But if someone's from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, for example, they're very unlikely to send them back because, for the obvious reason that those are extremely dangerous countries and there are various legal hurdles. Again, I imagine a lot of the public won't really care one way or the other about that. But as Peter was saying there, you know, the French essentially face exactly the same problem that we do, with a similar sort of scale. And they haven't found a way to solve it either. So.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what this polling suggests, that there's no hope, really, in the Conservative or Labour Party to sort this issue. I mean,
yeah, I mean, that speaks
isn't
to...
high, is it?
No, I mean, it speaks... I've said this a few times on our own site, that I think one of the biggest problems in British politics, aside from any particular policy area, is that the public do not trust the political class at all, whatever party they are, to deliver anything. Feel like they've been led down the garden path too many times. So when we see the podium, you know, the policy is popular, but when you see the podium saying stop the boats, if in 2 years people are still coming in their thousands every month into the country, you know, Rishi Sunak's opponents are just going to show that podium and say...
Yeah, all right, but have we come to a conclusion? Because this is the issue. Was it 2018, I think the figure was 300?
Yeah.
And
in small boats.
Yeah, in small boats. And last year it was 45,000.
Yeah.
Right, so have we determined what on earth has changed between 2018 and 2022?
No, it's an interesting...
Because that'd be the key, wouldn't it?
I guess it's one of those things that's just sort of snowballed once people realised that this was a way of doing it. I think it's partly we saw the migration crisis in the Mediterranean, where getting to Europe by boat became a big thing, particularly after the war in Syria in particular. You know, there's a huge uptick in migration from various countries, though. But no, I don't think there's one particular reason. It may be that the criminal gangs have got more sophisticated or better. Obviously, Labour's response to all this is, oh, we'll go after the people smugglers. But that, to me, that doesn't really make sense. You shut down one gang, another one will just spring up, because the incentives, as long as the economic incentives are there, someone will be doing it.
Someone will do it.
You know.
Look, in terms of the Labour Party, what are we to make? Because these all tie in together, don't they? According to our People's poll, only 20% of voters think the appointment of Sue Gray as Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff is appropriate. And also, when it comes to the Labour lead, it's below 20 points for the first time in a long time now. But that's primarily down to Labour losing 3%, not the Tories picking it up. Now, are these two interlinked, do we think?
I don't think the Sue Gray thing is enough on people's radar compared to those big issues like immigration, the health service economy, things like that. I think it's quite a kind of inside baseball sort of story for people who are into, you know, political nerds like me. Yeah. I think even if Labour are below 20 points, it's still a massive lead. Remember, Tony Blair won in *97. His lead was 12 points. And he got over 400. Wow. And he got over 400 MPs. I mean, Labour is still in big win landslide territory, even with a slightly reduced poll. But we've got so used to these enormous leads that when it falls a bit, you think... The only thing I would say is that I think Labour's lead is a bit soft. I don't think people are very convinced by Keir Starmer. His personal ratings aren't very good. Rishi Sunak's ratings are actually better than Keir Starmer's.
And rising, it must be said.
Yeah, and the trajectory seems good for him, but he started from such a bad position that he's kind of having to claw back progress. But I do think there's a softness in the electorate in general. Tribal loyalties are nowhere near what they were even sort of 20 years ago. You don't get people who are like, I vote Labour because I've always voted Labour, in the same way as maybe their parents' generation was. So it's much less predictable. And we've seen that in the previous elections as well, that people have been switching a lot. So, you know, I still think that the Tories have it all to do, but, you know, there could be some surprises thrown up yet.
And it could... Well, it is next year, isn't it, where we'll be looking at an election. So there's a long time between here and there. And Rishi Sunak, in the meantime, seems to be a Prime Minister who's getting things done. I mean, look at the Windsor Framework, and now he's meeting Macron, the first Anglo-French summit in 5 years. I mean, he is going to be someone, I think, who quietly gets things done.
Yeah, we talk a lot about optics in politics, and he's had some pretty good ones. Recently, as you say, the Northern Ireland Protocol thing seems to have kind of lanced that boil And there doesn't seem to have been much of a Tory rebellion about it as well. I think that's what will be most pleasing to him. The DUP seem to be willing to go along with it as well. And as you say, yeah, there's less of the kind of fighting with other leaders that characterised the Johnson and to an extent the May era as well. So, yeah, in that sense, his promise of kind of calmness and continuity, he's perhaps making good on that. The only thing I would say is that the economic headwinds are still really bad. And I think if people at the end of next year going into election are feeling poorer, it's that kind of Reagan question from the 80s, do you feel better off than you did 4 years ago? How people answer that question, I think, is pretty crucial.
Yeah, well, it'll be an interesting year to see how we all feel by the end of it. John, really good to see you this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
Well, let us know what you make of the results of the GB News People's Poll. GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, don't be one of those, because a lot of people, I've noticed, tweet me and say, well, how do I get involved with it? It's like any polling company, it selects random people and then it's, all processed. So it's not just a poll of GB News viewers.
Yes.
It's, because then that would be very skewed, wouldn't it? So it is a general poll. So we don't invite you to take part in that way. It's all done by a polling company.
Yeah. It's always very interesting, though, isn't it? Always.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's common sense.
Yeah,
I think.
It really is.
There you go. Now, snowstorms have swept across large parts of the UK, you may well have noticed, with the Met Office issuing amber warnings for strong winds and heavy snow again.
Yes, temperatures last night were the coldest reported in March for more than a decade, with parts of North Wales and the northeast of England recording up to 40 centimetres of snow.
40? I mean, I can't...
What's that? It's bigger than a ruler.
When I heard that yesterday, I thought that was they'd read it wrong. Honestly, I thought people were just getting the figures wrong.
Isn't it?
It's a
Especially
lot
in
of
this
snow.
country.
Well, significant disruption to transport and phone network coverage is expected throughout the day in the areas hardest hit by the cold front.
Well, joining us now this morning is weather expert Phil Morris. Good morning to you, Phil. We hope you're nice and warm. You're not out in the snow this morning. That's very good. What is going on, Phil? It's March. We thought we were in spring. And now we've got 40 centimetres of snow.
That's right. We're having a lot of snow at the moment. Now, I've just contacted my friend Buxton Weather Watch, and they've got 35 centimetres of snow in Buxton this morning. All the roads are closed, moving out north into the out of the A6. The conditions up there are terrible, and a whole of northern England this morning, very, very poor conditions, particularly above 100 metres, where up to 30 centimetres of snow have fallen. What is happening? We've had an Arctic air mass that's come down from the north on Monday and Tuesday, and very gradually the warmer southerly winds are trying to push back up, but there's been a real struggle. The snow started in southern counties on Wednesday and it's moved up in the Midlands. Yesterday we had 7 to 10 centimetres in the West Midlands and some here in Leicestershire too, and then overnight we had another fall of snow up to 30-40 centimetres. The low pressure this morning is now crossing into the northern England and is moving out into the North Sea. The snow has actually returned a bit further south here in Leicestershire and Rothley. Snow is again falling this morning and it had turned to rain. We've got really poor conditions here and we're quite low down, so the snow level is falling. This morning it's going to stay very snowy, and then gradually that snow is going to move out into the North Sea, and then tonight a very, very cold night ahead.
But they were talking about, I mean, last week they were saying this could be sort of 10 days, a fortnight of this Arctic blast coming in. Can we expect these sort of snowy conditions to last that long, Phil?
Not as a total. We've got actually, once this cold air weather is gone, tonight we're going to go down to -5 to -10 Celsius again, and Saturday as well is going to be a cold day. Then we've got another warm front coming up on Saturday, and then that'll start off as snow. But Sunday is going to turn completely the opposite way. We're going to got a tropical air mass coming up from the south. The temperatures on Sunday could reach 10 to 12 degrees, very much what happened in December, and then getting colder again next week. The battle between the warm southerly winds and the cold Arctic air is going to continue into next week with some more snow. We've had 5 or 6 weeks of very benign weather. This week has certainly been anything but that, and so winter is still with us, and more snow perhaps next week too.
But in the meantime, as we see so often in this country, lots of disruption anytime we see snow.
Absolutely. I mean, we're just not used to snow. We don't get a lot of snow this winter. Many of us didn't see a flake in central and northern England. We have the snow clearing facilities. It always causes chaos, but it is quite severe, particularly for March. Going back to the Beast of the East 2018, probably the worst since then, and very, very cold air as well. And we're just not used to it, but that's gradually this morning going to get better. But travel disruption for the whole of the day. Don't think about travelling over northern England and the higher routes. And probably till Saturday, it's really, really poor up there. And even some of the lower routes this morning are not good too. So the message is, if you don't need to travel in those areas, please don't. And the conditions will start to ease later on this morning into this afternoon. But again, they could return next week.
I tell you what, Phil, it's not a boring career being a weather expert, is it? Always keeps you on your toes.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating, Stephen, because the weather in this country is changing so much. As I say, by Sunday we're up to 12 or 13 degrees, almost ready for shorts. Today it's minus 12, 13, and it's deep Arctic cold. That is UK for you. That is the weather. It's always doing something interesting. And as amateur forecasters, about 50 to 100 on Twitter. We have debates, we have a partisan talking about it, and it's a great experience, and it's such a wonderful subject to study, and we all love it, even though it can be dangerous at times. So, yes, the weather is a fascinating subject.
Certainly is. Phil, really good to talk to you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Give my love to Leicestershire. I love Leicestershire.
Is that where you're from?
No. Oh, no, I'm from the Lake District.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But it used to be part of my patch when I was a radio reporter. I used to cover Leicestershire quite a bit.
Well, if you're in a lovely, snowy part of the world like Leicestershire, send us your pictures, please. If you've been building snowmen or anything fun like that, gbviews at gbnews.uk. I like a nice garden shot.
Yeah.
You've got a lovely garden. Have you got any snow?
We had a bit over the week, but only a sprinkling. Look, we've got much more to come for you, including countless small businesses face closure because of soaring bills and energy use, of course. We'll tell you more in a minute.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie. It is 28 minutes past 6. Still to come for you.
The Foreign Secretary James Cleverly will be joining us at 7:10 ahead of Rishi Sunak's visit to Paris later today.
You may have heard that the world famous? No, I think that's pushing it a bit. Anyway, Mystic Meg died yesterday at the age of 80. Did she see it coming, do you think? We'll take a look at her life with fellow astrologer Marjorie Orr at 10 to 8. I never took her seriously, Mystic Meg.
No.
She was a bit of a caricature, wasn't she, of an astrologer?
Well, my horoscope never quite matched what was going on in my life.
I know, they never did with the
She was
Mystic
very
Meg things.
famous, though, and lots of people really loved her.
Yeah, but world famous, I think, is pushing it a little bit. Oh, look, I'm dangling off.
He's dangling. Hang on.
Reattach me, darling, reattach me.
He's very relaxed. In this break, his earpiece was not in, and he had 10 seconds to sit down. I've never seen someone more relaxed. There you go.
I mean, why faff? You can sort it go. You know how TV works. It's nothing you don't know about. We have to listen to people in our ear. It drives us mad.
Yeah. We like the moments of chaos, so we don't mind.
If you want to get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Now, almost 7,000 convenience stores across the UK are at risk of closure due to soaring bills and strict energy contracts.
The Association of Convenience Stores says that an average-sized store is facing rates of 95p per kilowatt hour, and that would mean paying more than £75,000 a year. Now, that compares to £20,000 just 2 years ago.
It's a sharp rise, isn't it? Well, joining us now is the CEO of the Association of Convenience Stores, James Lohman. Good morning to you, James. Thank you so much for your company. So, I mean, a huge rise there in the cost of energy bills. But just explain to us, how badly are convenience stores suffering?
Well, this specific issue is a really acute one for actually a minority of stores. So if you were lucky enough to sign a contract in 2021, and that might be a 3-4 year contract, you're actually kind of okay now. You're on an affordable rate. But it's the businesses that, through no fault of their own, found their contracts coming up around August, September last year. And they're paying huge fees, which you talked about there, doubling, tripling, quadrupling, even more the cost of their energy. And for those businesses, the government support runs out at the end of this month. So from next month, they've got very little support from government. There is some, but it's a tiny amount that won't touch the sides for those businesses. So unless we get more support from there on, these otherwise very healthy, very viable, very relevant businesses are going to find themselves just unable to cope. That sort of increasing cost, it just blows the economics of running a store out of the water. So we need help and targeted at those businesses who particularly need it, or they will. And we don't go around forecasting closures very often at all. It's not that's not our message at all. But on this occasion, that would be the consequence if no help's provided.
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem. There will be people who say, well, look, can we afford to provide even more assistance? I guess the argument is, well, small businesses are the lifeblood of the economy, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's a question about, can the government afford not to? Targeted support at these businesses would pay back in year one in terms of the corporation tax, the payroll taxes, business rates that these businesses pay. What we're not saying here is prop up a sector that will probably fail in 2 or 3 years anyway. This is a really resilient sector, really adaptable, really relevant to consumers. But this specific issue will take some of those businesses down. And one of the ways that we're quite unusual is that we use more energy in the summer than the winter. So we chill a lot of food, obviously, and that's really important to us. And so as it gets warmer in the summer, we use more electricity than we actually do in the winter. So we've got that double hit for those businesses. Their energy usage is going to go up, and the government support runs out.
Can I just ask about the business rates then? If they're going to go up from 19 to 25% on top of these increased prices, what's that going to do?
Well, at the moment, to the government's credit, they've given very significant business rate support for the next financial year. So essentially, we're taking 3/4 off our members and many other businesses' bills. So that's really, really welcome. So we're very concerned about the long-term position with business rates. Is it right that there should be a tax of that nature at all? Is it too high? Is it falling in the right places? But actually, for the next year, that's not going to be the acute issue for us. The acute issue is going to be for those businesses, their energy bills going up. So it can be government support, better targeted, and they've really struggled to target that. Or it could be on top of that, working with the energy companies to say, look, if you've got a business in this long-term contract, can you let them out early so they can now get back on the open market? Because obviously those rates that those businesses signed up to in the sort of third quarter of last year, the wholesale rates, they're lower now. Those rates have come down. So they're not as low as they were in 2020, but they've come down. So you've got a chance of negotiating a better rate. Or could you go to what's called blend and extend contracts, where you extend with that supplier, but the rate comes down for a longer period? So there's some direct support we need, but also working with the energy companies, and the government needs to push them and lead on that to help these businesses get through this period of time.
Okay. James, really good to see you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. We'll see if the government comes up with anything in the budget, of course. Keep your fingers crossed for that one. But we've got much more to come for you in just a few minutes, including all the newspapers with Nigel Nelson and Claire Pearsall.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
Let's have a look at the papers for you this morning. The HS2 line between London and Manchester may not be ready until 2041 now, according to the Times.
The Guardian reports that at least 500 people have died after ambulance delays last year.
BBC staff have been left boiling with anger at Gary Lineker after he sparked an impartiality row with comments about the government's migrant policies. That's in the Mail.
The Eye also reports that HS2 is to be delayed by another 2 years as ministers try to make savings in the face of inflation.
The BBC is under pressure to make Lineker apologise for a tweet criticising government policy. That's according to The Express.
The Daily Telegraph leads with concern over sex education, saying that current guidance places no limits on what can be taught to children.
And back to HS2 in the Daily Mirror.
And The Sun has something totally different. News of what it describes as another WAG war.
And the Daily Star says Prince Harry has spent the last 3 years moaning about life as a royal, but has now declared his children have a right to be a prince and princess. It's their birthright. Yes. Well, actually, I mean, it's not wrong. It sort of is. But say, if he hated it so much, why would you?
No, I was quite surprised by that yesterday. I did think, and Meghan Markle as well, I did think you'd maybe not want your children to be prince and princesses, considering how difficult they have found it. Certainly very interesting.
Yes.
Let us know what you think about that. But time to go through the papers now. And joining us this morning is our favourite husband and wife team, Claire Pearsall and Nigel Nelson. Good morning to you. Brilliant to have you with us. Claire, let's start with you, shall we? It's on the front of many of the papers this morning. HS2 and yet more delays.
Is anybody remotely surprised that there is another delay? The whole HS2 debacle is the same age as my son. This began all in January of 2009, and it was under the Labour administration. We're looking at the needs of rail infrastructure going up through the north, and it was then taken up by the coalition government. And here we are, billions of pounds, looking like it's going to be wasted on something which is never going to happen. And I think that we have to start to look at these infrastructure projects properly as to whether we now continue to put all of this money in. The world has changed, travelling has changed, and if this is only going to cut sort of 20 minutes off a journey from London to Birmingham, for example, is it really worth putting the money in? What's the point?
There's so much work been done already, though. I mean, if you live around, you know, the area where the route is, I mean, there's so much actual infrastructure been put in now.
There is, and the same happens in Kent. I live near the site of High Speed 1, and I remember when that came up, and so many properties were compulsory purchase, line has been put in, that was then never used and was scrapped, and the houses resold, and it caused an awful lot of problems. The high-speed line is up and running, and for some people it's fantastic, but the problem comes when you start to look at affordability of tickets. I could travel over and get the high-speed 1 link into London, but it's going to be about 3 times the price of just trundling into London on the usual line down the road. So I think we need to look at what this is actually going to cost passengers, because the cost of living is such that train fare is very, very expensive, having just gone up at the beginning of this month. HS2 inevitably will have a higher ticket price attached to it. So is it going to level up? I'm not sure it really is. Why do we not put more infrastructure in on the existing railways? Why don't we improve roads, stop penalising motorists, and perhaps scrap this project now and again?
Nigel, what do you think? I mean, politically, it's dangerous to stop it, isn't it?
It is a bit, after you spent about £10 billion on it so far. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg was saying on GB News that maybe it's time to cut our losses, that if we're all working differently, as Claire pointed out, we should perhaps think again. The one bit I think that should go ahead is actually perhaps not HS2, but HS3, which is the Northern Powerhouse link, because train services up in the north of England, I know our train service where we live is actually pretty awful, but in the north it's even worse. And if HS3 went ahead, you'd link Newcastle, Leeds, Hull, Liverpool, Manchester and Manchester Airport. That might actually solve your levelling up criticism anyway.
Because there's nothing, you know, it's putting something new in.
Yeah.
Rather than just replacing...
That's right, yes.
And it's an area of the country that's so desperately in need of better transport.
That's the point. And if you're serious about levelling up, what you've got to do is actually provide decent transport links in the north of England. Whether or not we need to get to London 20 minutes quicker any longer, that's a moot point.
Oh, let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. It'd be fascinating, actually, to get your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, definitely will.
Nigel, let's talk France, would we? Should we, even?
We shall, yes.
200. Do you reckon we're going to agree to give France about 200 million quid?
Sounds like it, doesn't it?
To stop more boats.
Yeah, that's what the Times is saying. And I think what the Prime Minister is trying to do is put the best gloss on this summit that he's having in Paris today, on the basis that it sounds very likely that we won't get a returns policy out of the French. That one of the things that would hugely help with Channel crossings is if we could get the return people back to safe countries as we were able to do before Brexit. France is saying, actually, you can do this, but it should be an EU-wide deal. In other words, the deal that we lost, rather than a specific deal with France. Yet France, of course, is the major issue. So it wouldn't stop small boat crossings, but it would actually help if they would take some people back, if they've already applied for asylum in France, first of all.
But, I mean, at the moment, it's hard to see what we're getting out of this. I mean, if Rishi Sunak goes there today and agrees to another 200 million, I mean, it's vast amounts of money. I mean, there was another 62 million, I think, pledged in November last year. I mean, we're just throwing money at the situation.
Yeah, the French economy did.
But what are the British getting back? Well, we're not getting a return.
Well, I mean, what we'd hope we'd get back is that the French would put more gendarmes on the beaches and stop people actually crossing. But we're still still paying for it. I mean, I think we have to take the point that the French aren't terribly concerned if people are leaving their country and coming to ours. In the same way, we wouldn't be hugely concerned if it was the other way round. But if you're going to actually solve this problem, it is an international one. It's one that the French and the rest of the EU should try and help with. And at the moment, they're not. Maybe the Northern Ireland deal will actually butter up Europe enough that they'll start assisting us.
Is it unrealistic, Claire, for France to say this has to be an EU agreement rather than just an Anglo-French agreement?
No, it's not unrealistic. France can't make decisions for the rest of the EU.
Would it have to?
No, it wouldn't. But I think this is what everybody is looking at Macron to come up with an agreement that Britain can have a returns agreement with the EU. And of course, it doesn't. The EU isn't set up like that. One person, France, their French president, cannot make that decision for the rest of the 27 member states. So I think that it's really quite difficult. I don't think we're going to come back with any headline-grabbing deals from this. I think it is being overplayed. I think it is the start of a relationship going forward. Now, the relationship between England and France historically has been bad, but certainly for the last 4 years has been pretty terminal. I think this is a way forward, and if we can get Macron on side, and yes, it's going to take some money, and this is not what people want to hear, but he may well be able to help us with the rest of the EU member states and the EU Commission. You could then look at the ECHR problem that we currently have in this country, and there might be a way around it. So this could well be a good investment in the future.
Oh, well, we shall fingers crossed.
Yeah, Claire, let's stick with you, shall we? This is in the Express. BBC is under pressure to make Gary Lineker apologise.
Now, I do think that this has been a bit of a little gift for the government, because the Gary Lineker row, now entering day 3 of his tweet, covered nicely the HS2 announcement, which went out last night, a day before the House isn't sitting and everybody was not paying attention, and we couldn't discuss it. It seems to continue on as to whether Gary Lineker needs to say sorry.
What's up with him? Because it's... Right, admit it, he's entitled to his views, and ordinarily he would be entitled to tweet as an ordinary human being.
Yeah.
He's one of the highest paid members, employees of the BBC.
Yes.
And there is an impartiality sort of rule, a clause almost that goes in with that sort of work.
Absolutely, and I think this is the problem. The BBC has this impartiality clause, and many other presenters and pundits have been sacked from the BBC for far less than this. So the BBC needs to sort out whether it is going to police this properly, or if people like Gary Lineker can seemingly get away with it. And I think you have to treat everybody fairly. If you are working at the BBC in that capacity, then you need to be able to stick to that agreement. And the BBC need to deal with everybody the same way. And Gary Lineker does seem to get some unfair treatment. He has been allowed to do this previously. It's not his first foray into making these kind of comments. I don't think he needs to be sacked. I don't think there's... I really don't. I'm not one for calling people to be sacked. How about he just sticks to football? If he wants to go along the political line...
But he's been told this before.
He has, and that's what I mean about things not being policed fairly and people being dealt with differently.
So, because he's crossed the line multiple times, Nigel, isn't there an argument to say, well, you're not sticking to your contract?
Well, apparently he is sticking to his contract. This is the problem. In the small print of the contract, he is allowed to do stuff like this. Now, if he'd said simply that as he did, that the small boat policy was cruel and actually hurts vulnerable people, I would have thought that was fair comment. Certainly, I think that. To start comparing it with Nazi Germany, there is no equivalence. Question is, what do the BBC do about it? Do they turn around to him and say, you have no right to free speech, and we have a whole different argument? What seems to have come out of this is we're 3 days into this story now. It's still on the front pages of the papers. The government are cock-a-hoop because no one is examining their immigration policy. We're all talking about a Gary Lineker tweet.
Yeah.
Let us know what you make about that. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I know there are many people at the BBC, journalists and reporters doctors, the like, who do sign this impartiality
That's
contract.
all part of the deal, isn't it?
And they are up in arms. They are so frustrated and so angry about what they're seeing. And it is different because Gary Lineker is a freelancer. I don't think his contract is quite as strict, but still they see it as being treated very differently.
This is the thing.
Must be frustrating.
Yes, there's got to be a straight line for everyone, I think. We're going to leave it there for the time being. Claire, Nigel, it's good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. We'll catch up with you a little bit later on. But in the meantime, let's talk about some new data, should we? Which shows parents are spending up to 80% of their income on childcare, while others struggle finding care because of a limited availability across the country.
Yes, think tank Nesta revealed the battle that parents face paying someone to look after their children while they're at work. And 2 further studies highlight lacking places in half of Britain's local authorities, with demand doubling current available resources.
Well, let's talk to Megan Meek-O'Connor, who's Senior Policy Advisor for Save the Children, and joins us now. Really good to see you this morning. Are you surprised by the results of this study? Because, I mean, some of the costs clearly are absolutely astronomical.
I'm not at all surprised by the results of this study. This is something we've been saying for a long time at Save the Children, that the costs are way too high. And a key problem is that these costs just prevent parents from moving into work at all, because parents can't really see the benefit. If you're spending up to 80% of your earnings on childcare, then it's really hard to move into work, because you've also got to think about transport costs to get there. You've got to think about work that fits around picking your kids up. And it's just really, really difficult for parents.
And there was a story out yesterday that full-time nursery for under 2s can be £15,000 a year. I mean, ultimately, this is going to mean that people cannot afford to have children, or if they can afford to have one, they certainly can't afford to have a second.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And it's true that for larger families, the costs become even more impossible. And we particularly focus on families who are on universal credit. And there, the costs are just so high that we speak to a lot of families who really want to be in work and are hoping to move into work, but just can't because it becomes too expensive. I was speaking to families just yesterday who told us about having to leave work because of the costs. And we've done some polling recently as well, which showed that over half of mothers with children of primary school age or younger had to just cut their working hours and work less and work in jobs that maybe they didn't want to as much or didn't suit them so much because of how expensive childcare is.
I mean, it seems an odd situation where we're in a position where childcare is costing such a huge proportion of salary, and yet people, I mean, wouldn't people just be better off having a parent at home? But there seems to be a situation where people can't afford to live on one. You can't raise a family on one income now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think people are really sort of between a rock and a hard place at the moment, where costs are rising so much that you desperately need to be in work. But at the same time, these childcare providers are facing the same kind of cost of living problems. And that's part of why they're having to increase their fees too. So, yeah, parents are in a really, really hard position.
What can be done to tackle this?
Well, there are a couple of things that we'd really like to see. There's an issue within universal credit where parents who are on universal credit and hoping to move into work, they do get support with the childcare costs, but you have to pay those fees up front, which means that before you've even started working, before you've got your salary, you're expected to pay a month of childcare fees. And I don't know where you're supposed to magic that money from. So something we'd like to see is we'd like to see the upfront cost issue within universal credit sorted out at the spring statement next week. But we'd also like to see the hours that are funded by the government. We'd like to see those hours funded properly, because we know that providers are struggling just as much as parents are struggling. And then we'd also like to see an extension of those free hours. For example, free hours don't start for most parents until your child is 3 or 4. And so there's this period where, the end of your parental leave, that's come to an end, but you don't get any free hours. So you're meant to pay these exorbitant costs, and parents are put in a really difficult position there.
OK, look, Megan, it's really good to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. If you're affected by that, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You have been getting in touch a lot this morning, actually. Lots of snow pictures. If you're on the radio, we'll describe them for you as best we can. Michael, morning, Michael, says, as Paul Hawkins was up at Otley Chevin yesterday, I thought I'd send you this picture showing the outside of my house this morning. Just a couple of miles from Chevin. Do we get to see it? Here we go. Michael,
now.
we're getting there.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. In fact, I get to see Chevin every day from my kitchen window.
Lots of snow there, isn't it? Really,
All
really
the
thick.
cars absolutely covered in it there.
Michelle's been in touch. She says, good morning from snowy Liverpool. And there's a picture of, I would imagine, the garden from Michelle.
Yeah.
Lovely thick snow there.
Very thick. Here's Remy as well, who's a one-year-old Shih Tzu.
Where are you getting all of this from?
This is here, look.
Oh, is it there?
It's on that, yeah. And apparently Ellie showed a picture of Remy on Christmas morning.
Oh, there you go. Remy's famous.
But we can't. We've seemed to have lost the picture of Remy. Anyway, there you go. Apologies, Michelle. Alfin, morning, Alfin. This is his dog in the snow yesterday.
Now that is a great picture.
I don't know where it is. The Fells.
Looks like the moors or something, doesn't it?
Absolutely gorgeous.
Beautiful. Lovely dog there. Alison has taken some pictures in Rotherham, South Yorkshire. She said it's still snowing, if you can believe it. It looks really, really thick there.
Yeah, and Lee says, this is what greeted me this morning in... Oh, we haven't got Lee. We haven't got Lee's picture. Oh, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. Lee's in Rowlandsgill, about 6 miles west of Newcastle. And it's still snowing there.
Yeah.
So there you go. I mean, it's horrific. I have to say, it looks beautiful.
It does.
But I'm one of those... It's one of those things, isn't it? As a kid, you think, snow's fantastic.
Yeah.
But then as soon as you have to start driving about in it...
If you can sit and watch it, it's lovely.
Yeah, but it's when you have to start moving about. Nige says, there's no snow here in Weymouth, but my stepdaughter drove from Edinburgh yesterday afternoon and said there was steady snow, but it was passable. She did say people don't know how to drive, even if they're in a 4x4. How do electric vehicles do in the weather? I don't know. Is there an issue with electric vehicles?
There is. Apparently their capacity goes down by like a third in icy and snowy conditions.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, they don't go half as far, no. So that is an issue. And I think that's the point, that people don't know how to drive in the snow. I wouldn't know what to do.
Well, we're not trained in it, are we?
We're not used to it.
Perhaps it should be built in if we're going to get more snowy weather. Keep your thoughts coming through, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let's have a look at that forecast for you.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Things calming down a bit today. We still have warnings in place at the moment, but the snow is going to be starting to ease away through the morning thanks to this area of low pressure. That was the one that brought the heavy snow and is still bringing some very strong winds across the southwest and still snow in places, but it is pulling away into the near continent and taking the snow and rain mix with it. So the snow is easing now across northern England, continuing to fizzle out across Wales and disappearing from Northern Ireland too. But still some snow mixed in with rain and sleet over eastern England, even into the afternoon. Snow showers in northern Scotland continue, so potentially icy here. For many, actually, it's a dry and a bright day, quite a bit of sunshine around, but it is cold. Temperatures struggling a bit with those northerly winds, so after things did turn a bit milder yesterday across the south, we're back to single figures at best here, I suspect, further north 4 or 5 degrees, and feeling colder on these North Sea coasts with a brisk wind. Same goes for northern Scotland, where further snow flurries are likely this afternoon across the Northern Isles especially. They'll push into the mainland during this evening, so again, potentially quite icy, but the snow showers and sleet and rain showers clearing away from eastern England pretty sharply. And then a sharp frost, a hard frost, as we head into the weekend. Temperatures are going to be well below freezing, even in towns and cities, down to -4 or -5, minus double digits likely through some sheltered glens across Scotland. Not quite so cold in the far southwest. We'll probably keep a little bit more cloud here. And we do have some more clouds spilling in with some outbreaks of rain and hill snow edging in during the day. For many, Saturday's dry and fine with sunny spells, and it'll stay that way across much of Scotland, northern and eastern England. But further west, we will see wet weather coming in. It will be mostly rain at low levels, but some snow likely over the hills of Wales and Northern Ireland. And that wintry mix with further snow likely over northern England and parts of Scotland on Saturday night. Goodbye.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Several people have been killed after a gunman opened fire in northern Germany last night.
Good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock on Friday, the 10th of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie. These are your top stories this morning.
And a quick warning, the following does contain flashing images. A number of people have been killed and multiple others have been injured in Germany after a gunman stormed a Jehovah's Witness hall. We'll keep you updated throughout the morning with our Home and Security editor, Mark White.
With details of the new immigration bill emerging this week, the Prime Minister is now heading to Paris for talks with his French counterpart to try to tackle the small boats crisis. We're going to talk to the Foreign Secretary in about 10 minutes and the Shadow Immigration Minister at 7:20.
Well, this comes as our GB News' People's Poll reveals a majority of voters agree with the government and think those arriving illegally across the Channel should be removed from the UK and blocked from returning. We'll be digesting that and much more from our polling throughout the morning as Labour hold their 20-point lead in the polls.
We would love to hear from you, as always, whatever you want to talk about, whether it's all the serious politics going on or whether it's just about the weather. GB Views at gbnews.uk.
Well, we start this morning with some breaking news overnight. Several people have been killed in a shooting at a Jehovah's Witness meeting hall in northern Germany. Police say the incident happened at around 9 p.m. last night and the gunman acted alone and is thought to be dead. Well, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is with us now to bring us up to date with the latest. Good morning to you, Mark. What do we know?
Well, a number of people had been gathered in this Jehovah's Witness hall, we think, for Bible study. As you say, it was about 9 o'clock local time when shots rang out inside this building. Now, it's only about half a mile away from the main police headquarters in Hamburg. So local officers and then those tactical firearms support officers were on scene pretty quickly. And they're trained now throughout the world, really, following the terrible attacks in Mumbai, remember, a couple of decades ago, with marauding gun attacks, just to push forward, get in the building, try and confront whoever might be responsible for the shooting and save as many lives as possible. Inside, though, they found quite a horrific scene with multiple people shot, a number fatally injured, and others that were less seriously injured, that they managed to get out of the building into a hospital. Now, in the early hours of this morning, local police chief in Hamburg gave this update.
The police were relatively close by and then went into the building quite quickly. The police officers who went in found people who may have been seriously injured by firearms, some of them fatally. The officers also heard a shot from the upper part of the building and went upstairs, where they also found a person. So far, we have no indication that any perpetrators fled. We now have to carry out the evaluation of the crime scene. At the moment, we have no clues about the victims. All we know is that several people have died here. Several people have been injured. They have been taken to hospitals. I cannot give any information on the background at the moment. This is all still speculation. All we know is that the event took place this evening. In what framework and what the tenor of the event was is still unclear. It happened in a building of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but the reasons are still completely unclear.
Stattgefunden, aber die Hintergründe sind noch komplett unklar.
I mean, they seem to be working almost blind on this, don't they? So at that point, not familiar with the framework and the timings. Doesn't seem to be any indication on motive at all at this stage either.
Well, no, certainly not at this stage, although now that they believe that the gunman was among those who are deceased at the scene, they'll be able to try to establish that person's identity and then maybe look for a motivation that way. Of course, any time you get an attack like this with multiple casualties, also targeting a church, thoughts turn to the possibility of Islamist terrorism. However, all I would caution about this one is it appears that as police arrived, there was a shot from upstairs that the police think was the gunman taking their own lives. That doesn't normally fall into the pattern of the way in which Islamists will normally react when police arrive. It's normally a shootout, or they'll even go on to try to claim more lives. So let's just wait and see what is said with regard to that. As far as eyewitnesses are concerned, we know that they've been talking about bursts, short bursts of gunfire every 20 seconds or so, which seem to be really indicative of someone going from sort of room to room looking for potential victims. This is what one eyewitness told the local media.
We heard gunshots. I know what gunshots sound like. And the 12 continuous shots. I thought it was something at the construction site here, but then it's supposed to have been somehow at the petrol station or next door at the Jehovah's Witnesses. We took some pictures and saw people being taken away in black bags. That's all we saw. We didn't see any perpetrators or anything like that, but only what happened here shortly afterwards.
So that's an eyewitness speaking last night. What do we know about what's happening at the scene this morning?
Well, in terms of the operation to find those that were caught up in the shooting, that is over. It was over by about 3 o'clock in the morning. They had checked every inch of that building. So now it moves to the investigation phase, trying to establish who this gunman was. We've got forensic teams who are now in the building this morning, going from room to room, picking up as much in the way of evidence as they can to give them a timeline of exactly what unfolded inside this building.
OK, Mark, for now, thanks very much indeed. Mark's going to keep us fully up to date with that throughout the course of the morning. But it's time now for the GB News People's Poll.
And some breaking news just before that. Just in, according to the Office for National Statistics in the UK, the economy grew by 0.3% in January. So that's positive news.
That is positive news, yes. And we'll get a reaction to that in just a second. But with our poll, a majority of voters agree that people arriving in the UK legally should be removed and blocked from returning in line with the plans of the Home Secretary. Now, of course, the Prime Minister is in Paris this morning to meet President Macron for crunch talks.
But when asked about the small boats crisis, 40% say neither Rishi Sunak nor Keir Starmer can be trusted to handle it.
Only 20% of voters think the appointment of Sue Gray as Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff is appropriate. In the national poll, Labour, their lead has dropped below 20 points, but it's still 19 points, isn't it? It's still a huge huge gap between the two. Let's talk to academic and professor of politics Matt Goodwin, who's behind this poll. Matt, good morning to you. Let's kick off with that headline, should we, in terms of the migration plan. And I guess it's no surprise, I mean, it's probably why Rishi Sunak's been so determined to push on with this, that it is a plan which is popular with the majority of voters in this country.
Well, absolutely. I mean, taking harder action on this issue has been much more popular than many people in our commentariat would have you believe. Once again, in this poll, we find more than half the country support the core principle of the policy, which is to essentially remove illegal migrants and make it harder for them to return to the country. This is entirely consistent with other polling that we've done and points again to the fact that many people out there, a majority of people, are very supportive of pushing beyond the status quo and taking a tougher approach to managing this issue.
And in terms of people's faith in who can handle the boat crisis, it is very interesting, isn't it? 40% of respondents to this poll say neither Rishi Sunak nor Sir Keir Starmer can be trusted to handle it.
Yeah, I mean, the good news for Rishi Sunak is that he's ahead of Keir Starmer. On many of these questions, he's behind Keir Starmer. So there might have been perhaps a little bump given the news this week. But as you say, most of our respondents here, or at least a plurality, 40%, are saying, I don't trust anybody on this issue. And I think that's because for 20 years or so, really, the British people have been led up the garden path by both the left and the right on this issue. Nobody's resolved the crisis in the asylum system. Nobody's resolved the crisis on the borders in an effective way. Some of your viewers will remember the first asylum crisis of the 21st century in the early 2000s. We're now back facing another one, and voters are understandably fed up and disillusioned.
I'll tell you what is interesting, though, when you tie all this into, I mean, obviously, as you said, that disillusion and people, as you say, just being fed up with this situation. The polls, though, I mean, obviously, this is going to affect a lot of the polls, but they are closing somewhat, but not because the Tories are making gains, but because Labour is dropping down somewhat. It's going to be interesting to see how this latest news on the economy, growing by 0.3%. Now, it's not much, and it'd be a yet-to-be-verified figure, I should imagine. But if things start to move in the right direction economically and we start to feel a bit of positivity, do you think these polls may tighten?
I expect they will tighten. I think by the end of the year, when inflation is most likely lower, interest rates are lower, maybe we've avoided a long and deep recession, as was originally forecast, then I think actually the polls will narrow considerably. Rishi Sunak has gone out with this big gamble. He's got these 5 tests that he wants to pass before the next election. And to be frank, some of those are going to happen anyway. Inflation is going to fall, and it will probably fall quite sharply. He will be able to point to changes, I personally think, in the Channel. I think the legislation will have some effect there. And he'll also be able to point to the fact the country has not spent all of 23 and perhaps much of 24 in recession. So put all of this together, what he's hoping is he'll say to the country, look, I'm the competent, albeit quiet Prime Minister, getting things done. We're over the worst. That will be the narrative, I think, for the next election. And for that reason alone, I think the polls will narrow.
Let's look at another issue that was highlighted in the poll, and that is Sue Gray's appointment to the Labour Party. Only a small minority thinking that was appropriate. Now, as we just saw, Labour are ahead in the polls. For Sir Keir Starmer, he will want to keep this issue very quiet, won't he?
Yeah, well, as you say, more people think this is inappropriate than think it's appropriate. And we also looked, by the way, in this poll at whether people think the civil service is politically impartial. And again, only a small minority of voters do. So there is a challenge for the civil service here. The debates that we're all having online, is the civil service impartial, or does it take sides in political debates? There are a lot of people out there who don't think the civil service is impartial, and that should worry Whitehall. I mean, historically, this organisation has been seen to be independent, credible, impartial, but the Sue Gray affair, I think is a latest example of how it's been struggling to maintain that public perception.
Should politicians be particularly, well, and indeed the civil service be particularly worried about that? Because we all know the reality is in the job that they do that actually it is a pretty impartial role. If public perception is slightly skewed on that at the moment, there's no way you can convince that 80% that they're not right. I mean, you just have to almost ignore it, don't you, and carry on.
Well, of course, the big risk, if you look at democracies like America, is when the state becomes seen to be political, voters tend to react quite strongly against that. So in the US, we've had, pretty strident debates over the sort of so-called deep state, and we've had voters and presidents rebelling against that. I think, in Britain, luckily, we've avoided some of that. But, there are warning signs, and I think this is one of them, that a lot of people out there don't really buy into this notion that the key institutions of the state are politically impartial. And that is a concern. That is something to watch going forward.
OK. Matt, we've got to leave it there. Really good to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
Now, do stay with us. We're going to be speaking very shortly to James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary. We'll be talking to him about this migrant proposal of sending back anybody that comes to this country illegally, not allowing them to seek asylum. So do stay tuned for that after this short break.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Morning to you. 7:18, loads of you getting in touch on the French issue because, of course, there's the Anglo-French... do we call it a summit?
We do.
Today? It's probably a fair assumption, isn't it? It's the first time that we've had a top-level meeting like this. PM's heading over to the Elysee Palace today. First time in 5 years, which seems ridiculous, actually. They are our closest neighbour, aren't they? Anyway, it's all about the migrant situation. Stuart, morning, Stuart. Says the UK needs to stop giving the French money to stop the crossings. It's a complete waste of time and money. The UK needs to make the effort to stop them. Don't let them land and send straight back to France the same day if they're trying to enter illegally. Well, and I certainly understand the sort of... You're clearly frustrated by it all, Stuart. The problem is you've got to follow the rules.
Yeah.
And if they cross into our waters, then there are certainly, maritime and all the rest of it, all these responsibilities that come into play. You can't just sort of ignore them, keep them 10 feet from the shore. It's just not how it works.
And it's also a huge operation on both parts. I mean, those coasts in France, in Belgium and here in the UK, trying to keep an eye on everything and all of those small boats is really, really difficult. Sue says France should be completely on board with stopping the small boats because if successful, fewer migrants will turn up in France expecting to get to the UK. This would be a win-win for both countries.
Yeah, no, it's a positive outlook. Is it actually going to end up being that positive? Well, let's see if we can find out from the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, who joins us this morning. Minister, very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us here on GB News. Look, in terms of this, what are we expecting to see? Because, I mean, there are two issues, aren't there? There's patrolling the beaches, trying to stop people from heading to the UK, but there's also the huge issue of where we send people back to if they're stopped on our beaches once they've got here.
Well, yes, it's worth remembering that this summit is about a wide range of issues. And we have ministers from a number of government departments, trade ministers, environment ministers, defence secretary is here as well. So this summit is about a wide range of issues. But of course, our collective work to prevent the really, really significant increase in illegal migration is going to be a part of that. The French have already played a very important part in preventing a significant number of attempted crossings. And of course, we will be negotiating with them about what more we can do together to prevent people crossing the channel. And through the illegal migration bill, we, of course, are looking to find ways of returning people back to their countries of origin or another safe country to demonstrate to both the people smugglers themselves and those people who have put themselves in the hands of people smugglers that it is not worth the money or the effort or the risk to try and illegally come to the UK.
I mean, as you say, there are going to be collective issues discussed today, but the migrant issue will be at the forefront. And the UK has paid France at least £232 million in payments for this issue since 2014, latest of which in November, 62 million pledged by Suella Braverman. There could be more pledged today. We've been subsidising the French, haven't we, for many, many years, and there will be viewers and listeners today sitting at home saying, why are we continuing to pay the French when I'm struggling to heat my home? When do you think we will actually see a return on our investment?
Well, the truth is we have already been seeing a return on our investment. The French authorities have stopped around half of the attempted crossings. But we are seeing unprecedented numbers of people who are migrating through continental Europe, often through France, attempting to get to the UK. It is in our collective interests to get a grip of this. The French authorities and the British authorities have been working together. We want to find ways of being able to do more together, to be more effective together. This is, as I say, in part what we will be discussing today at the Anglo-French summit. But as I say, the money that we have been spending with the French authorities has made a difference. There have been many more people making the attempt. As I say, the French have stopped around half of the attempted crossings, and we're looking at finding ways of working with them to try and do more.
Is it reasonable, in your view, for Emmanuel Macron to be saying, you know, we will not agree on returning people to France if they're you know, caught in the UK and you know, the deportation can happen. We will not have them back in France. We are not in a position to make that agreement. You've got to talk to the EU as a body. Is that a reasonable position?
Well, migration issues, I mean, this is one of, I suppose, the byproducts of France's membership of the EU. So a lot of border control policy, a lot of migration policy is held at EU level. Of course, the individual EU member states have a role to play and they have something of a say, but much of this is done at EU level. And we will continue, of course, to work with the EU. In terms of the border enforcement, that is done by French officials, and therefore, of course, it is in our interest to work with France. And we know that France gets a higher number of illegal migrants than the UK. So this is not just a UK problem, this is a Europe-wide problem. And of course, you know, both France and the UK have a shared interest in resolving this issue. And this is why the negotiations have been held, I think, in a real positive spirit, and there's a real desire to coordinate. And we are really pushing. Both the French and the British authorities are really pushing to see what we can do to seriously reduce the numbers of people making those illegal journeys, both through France and across the Channel to the UK.
There is a positive spirit about this summit today, because it has been tense in recent months and years. I mean, even Liz Truss, she couldn't say whether Emmanuel Macron was a friend or foe. And now we have the papers and online commentators saying that Rishi Sunak and President Macron are going to be a bromance today. So do you think this could mark a new era in UK-French relations? Do you think things can actually be achieved here, or do you think this is just political theatre?
So I know that we are going to achieve a lot through this summit, because we have already been achieving a lot together. I've been coordinating very closely with my French opposite number with regard to our collective response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, for example. We spoke extensively at a whole series of international meetings. So I know, I don't know if I'd go as far as to describe it as a bromance, but there is a very strong professional relationship between the UK and France. We don't agree on everything, but we agree on a lot, and on the really big things like Ukraine's self-defense, like the issues of illegal migration. We find ourselves in very close agreement very often, and this is about operationalizing. It's about turning that shared desire to resolve an issue into actual actions, actual policies, actual processes. And I think that's why I'm optimistic that we're going to get a really good result out of today's summit. I'm not going to predict exactly what agreements we'll be able to settle on, but I know that the French president, the prime minister, have a shared desire to address the issues that we're going to be discussing.
Secretary of State, as always, it's really good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. See you again soon, I hope. In the meantime, let's see what Labour makes of all of this, should we? Shadow Minister for Immigration is Stephen Kinnock, and it is very good to see you, Mr Kinnock, once again this morning. I mean, what are your thoughts about what we may or may not achieve today?
Well, what we need to achieve is a returns agreement with France, which ensures that people coming on small boats are sent back. We also know that to get a deal in the European Union, like anything in life really, you have to have give and take. You have to put an offer on the table, and that's got to be about getting authorised routes that enable us to process asylum seekers outside the UK, in the EU and in other countries. We also need to get much more investment into our National Crime Agency. We would do that by cancelling the Rwanda scheme, which is incredibly expensive and unworkable. We've got to clear the backlog. which is acting as a magnet as well. 166,000 people in that backlog. That means rewiring the Home Office, getting senior caseworkers and decision makers making decisions much more quickly. And it's about making things like the Afghanistan scheme, a resettlement route, actually work, because it's not been working at all. We, of course, did a lot to get people out of Afghanistan, but since then, many were left behind, and we owe those people a debt of honour and gratitude. So there's a lot of hard yards, nitty-gritty work and quiet diplomacy that has to be done. And that really needs to start with the summit in Paris today.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the fact that your first point was sorting out a returns agreement. And a lot of people would agree with you on that. The problem is France is saying, no, we will not do it. You know, it's not within our remit to do it.
Yeah, obviously, we're dealing with a situation where we have successive Conservative governments that have been focused on trashing our relationship with our European partners and allies, from Boris Johnson negotiating the Northern Ireland Protocol in bad faith to Liz Truss not being sure whether France is a friend or a foe. So Mr. Sunak has a lot of work to do to rebuild some of those bridges. But it is also correct that the Dublin Convention, which governs returns agreements across the EU, is an EU-wide competence. And so whilst it's important that the UK and France is aligned on getting a returns deal, what I'd very much like to see is a UK-French approach to the EU in order to start getting a deal at EU level. But I mean, the French are correct that that is fundamentally a European policy, and it won't at the end of the day just be Mr. Macron's call on this.
If Labour were in government, what would you do to stop the boats arriving on our shores? Because this is an issue that people care about. In all of the polling, it's a top 3 issue is what we do with illegal migration in this country. It's costing £6 million a day to keep migrants in hotels, 45,000 people crossing the Channel last year. I mean, this is unsustainable, isn't it? And it needs to be tackled. But it's not always clear exactly what Labour's policy would be.
So Labour's plan is scrap the Rwanda deal, which is not working and is massively expensive. Redirect that money into the National Crime Agency and a cross-border police force to really crack down on the criminal gangs and work more closely with European partners and allies. Deal with the backlog. The backlog is a big part of the magnet. People know when they come here that they'll be stuck in the system for, on average, 450 days, and that's actually acting as a draw. So rewire the Home Office, get senior decision makers and caseworkers, rebuild morale in there because it's completely dysfunctional. The returns deal we've already discussed. It's absolutely crucial. You have to put yourself into the mind of somebody that's prepared to pay a people smuggler £5,000, £10,000, £15,000 and risk their lives on a small boat. Those people are ready to tolerate a very high level of risk. The only way to remove that demand is by making it clear that when you arrive in the UK, you'll get sent straight back to continental Europe. That will break the model of the people smugglers. But as I said, we're realists. We know you don't get a deal on that unless you put some skin in the game. You have to put something on the table. That's a deal based on give and take. And then finally, of course, the authorised routes, like from Afghanistan, where, as I say, we really do owe an honour, a debt of honour and gratitude. That Afghanistan scheme is not working at all. And that's why a lot of Afghans are getting on the small boats, because they're not being allowed through the authorised scheme.
All right, with the Afghans aside, and those, I mean, because you're quite right, there is an obligation, an ongoing obligation to some groups of people. And I know, as you say, some of them are trying to cross on small boats as well. For simplicity's sake, if we try and hive that off to an extent, you seem to be saying one of the biggest things that would reduce the demand for this was if people landed on our shores illegally, knowing they would be sort of immediately repatriated. Well, isn't that in effect you agreeing with the proposed government policy outlined this week?
Well, no, because the proposed government policy doesn't have any returns deal in place. So they're putting the cart before the horse. All they're going to do is add to the massive backlog and add to the massive cost. You've got to do the returns deal first and get a system in place which is enabling us to send people back to either the European Union or another safe third country, or, of course, to their country of origin. And until you've got that deal in place, frankly, the legislation that we're going to be discussing in Parliament next week is not worth the paper it's written on.
Oh, all right. So if those, for argument's sake, if those deals were in place, or there was a deal to send people to a safe country, would you then back legislation which said if they arrive illegally, they're taken out of the UK and would have no chance of returning? Would you actually support that policy then?
Well, if you have a returns deal in place, nobody will come. That's the whole point. You have to remove demand from the system. But to get that deal, we of course have to have a give and take approach. You don't negotiate anything in life, as you'll know, Stephen, without putting something on the table yourself. So that's the point of the negotiations with the European Union. That's how the Dublin Convention works. That's why in 2018 there were only 300 people crossing the Channel, and last year there were 45,000. Because when Boris Johnson botched the Brexit negotiations, we left the Dublin Convention and there was no successor to it. So what Rishi Sunak now is trying to do, without really admitting it, is to reinsert us into the Dublin Convention because we need to go back to 2018 levels of small boat crossings, which is what we had when we were still a member of the Dublin Convention.
Stephen Kinnock, it's really good to talk to you, as always. Thanks very much indeed. Fascinating.
Certainly is.
I mean, and do you know what? It's probably a very valid point. I was asking earlier on why the numbers have jumped up from 300 to 45,000. Stephen Kinnock says, well, it's because we came out of the Dublin Agreement, right? So there is no obvious route of return for people who get here illegally. But would those people travelling over know that?
No.
That's what I would question. Did they know that? Do people... Maybe they do. They're doing their research. They're spending a lot of money with people smugglers. Maybe they do know that. I wouldn't have known that, would you?
Or maybe it's the methods that have changed. I mean, certainly in Tony Blair's era, it was the back of lorries, wasn't it?
Oh,
that
yeah, it was a lot.
were making their way over. That became very, very difficult, especially around Calais. Perhaps it's the sophistication of the criminal gangs, and they've worked out small boats is the way to do it. It's a lot harder to manage, and it's a lot harder to get caught, isn't it? So perhaps that's what it is. Let us know what you think. Lots to unpack there. GBnews at gbnews.uk.
Yeah, we're going to take you through the papers in a couple of minutes. Don't go anywhere.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, this is IT support at GB News. No, sorry, I was just sorting a computer out. Honestly, the things I have to do...
Oh, dear. He's a man of many talents, is our
yes.
Stephen.
I'm all right with a laptop.
He is.
I like my tech, so I'm all right with a laptop.
Yeah.
Anyway, it is 7:39. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie. I should charge you 50 quid.
I should, yeah. What would I do without you? Looks a lot better now, thank you. Right, let's look at today's front pages for you. And the HS2 line between London and Manchester may not be ready until at least 2041. That's according to The Times.
For The Guardian, it says at least 500 people died after ambulance delays last year.
BBC staff have been left boiling with anger at Gary Lineker after he sparked an impartiality row with comments about the government's new migrant policies. That's according to the Daily Mail.
Now, for the Eye, that's going back to it was a bit flip-floppy this morning. The Eye is going back to HS2, delayed by another 2 years as ministers try to make savings.
And the BBC, we are flip-flopping, yes. The BBC is under pressure to make Gary Lineker apologise for a tweet which was criticising the government's policy on asylum seekers. That's in the Daily Express.
The Telegraph has concern over sex education, saying current guidance places no limits on what can be taught to children. Well, they can't be... What sort of detail are they going into?
Oh, dear, not good. The latest delay in HS2 is branded a betrayal of the North by the Daily Mirror.
The Sun has news of what it describes as another wag war. Oh, who cares?
And the Daily Star says Prince Harry has spent the last 3 years moaning about life as a royal, but has now declared his children have a right to be a prince and princess.
Let's see what Nigel Nelson and Claire Pearsall make of all of this lot. Morning to you both. Let's kick off with the serious stuff, Nigel. Looking at excess deaths because of ambulance delays in The Guardian.
And this is serious.
Oh, yeah.
What The Guardian has discovered, they've done a survey which shows that last year there were 500 patients who died, who were seriously ill, after ambulances took up to 15 hours to reach them. And that figure is double what it was in 2021. And we really have to get a grip of this. The situation we've got at the moment is that ambulances can't get patients into A&E because they're overcrowded, and A&Es are overcrowded because they can't get patients onto wards, because there are people who can leave, but there's nowhere to put them.
Yeah, no process.
So until you actually have a proper link-up with social care, this sort of logjam is going to continue. So it is something they really do have to get a grip on. It may well be we're looking at, complete reform of the NHS and the way it works. But certainly in this particular area, you are going to have to do something about the way that patients simply can't get from ambulance to ward because everything is blocked up.
Yeah.
It's that horrible term, isn't it? Bed blocking.
Yeah, I know,
It
yes.
is literally the case that people are too ill to live independently, but, can't stay...
Well, often they're not too ill. The real problem is they're not too ill, but they've got nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go.
And until they've got somewhere to go...
There are a couple of NHS trusts, and I can't remember, I think, is one on the Isle of Wight? Perhaps, and then there's one up in Lancashire which were looking at this issue years ago and have sold it and have not had any problems.
Yeah, and...
So, I mean, why can that lesson not be learned?
And that's the real difficulty, and it needs buy-in from the trusts itself, but also from the local authorities. Now, I will give a big shout out here to Sevenoaks District Council, who have what we call a hero team, who will work with the hospitals when they're looking to discharge people. It could be something simple. They need an extra step up to their front door. They need a ramp. They need a grab rail, something along those lines. And that is what is stopping them from leaving hospital. And local authorities are really well placed to go in. They know where the residents are. They know the kind of properties that they're dealing with, the areas they're dealing with, and often have good ties in with the hospital trusts themselves. And I think more of this needs to be rolled out. And the Isle of Wight were definitely ahead of the game looking at this. And it does work extremely well. And you get those patients through. And people have a much shorter time in hospital, a much quicker recovery time, families that feel more supported. And I think that general mood of it, so even if there is a bit of a lengthy wait, because they know they're going to get the help and it's going to be quick and delivered into their homes, people are quite satisfied with the service, which is something that we're not seeing at the moment. So anything that can change that narrative has to be good.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really just very distressing. I mean, I was on a picket line the other day with ambulance drivers who were saying that they've been arriving to elderly patients who've been lying on the floor for 13, 14 hours.
Yeah.
Literally because there's no other way they can get to hospital.
And it's not their fault.
No, exactly. Really difficult.
Talking about support for families, though, Jeremy Hunt on the budget. It's Wednesday budget day, isn't it?
It is.
But you reckon more money for childcare?
Well, that's the hope. That is the hope. And it's about time that we looked at childcare and what we can do to help. It is an extremely expensive form that we're paying out. I know I've had to pay it out myself, and the costs, according to the report here in the Times, the average cost for a child at nursery for an under 2-year-old has risen to nearly £15,000 a year. Now, if we want to encourage younger people, families, why not build houses? Why not provide better childcare? And the worrying aspect of all of it is that disabled children are quite often left without a place too, because local authorities don't have the space. So anything that the government can do, now this suggests that Jeremy Hunt will look at working with those on universal credit, so it will help the poorest families. The one thing that would help enormously is to have that payment up front. If you have to pay out an £1,000 nursery bill, it is one hell of a chunk out of your wage packet. And if you're on a low earning, that could leave you short to pay the rest of your bills whilst you then get it back from the government. So I think some upfront payments need to come in. But I also think it needs to be extended out, not just to those on universal credit, but those in the middle who are just struggling, but also need that childcare place.
Do you think there should be 3 hours before a child turns 3 or 4? Because we had a representative from Save the Children earlier who was saying that's the problem. You don't get those 3 hours until children are 3 or 4 years into their life, and it prevents women, especially, from going back to work or even having a second child. They simply can't afford to.
It does, and I must admit they were an absolute godsend to me, those 3 hours, because it did reduce my bill down. I think it's vitally important that we look at the early years sector as being an important part of a child's life, and we don't. And I think it's often looked at people are farming their children off to go to work. People have to work these days, that is a given. But also, it is of benefit to the child. Those early years practitioners are so great at working with children. The confidence that they get, the experience they have there, cannot be measured, and I think that we need to start looking at it as education rather than just a childcare provision, and we might be able to move forward on this.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. I've not thought of that. Nigel to the Sun, Zulu. It is a classic Michael Caine.
Absolutely.
But it is a white supremacist movie, according to a certain group.
That's right. This is Prevent, the counter-terror programme, and they've been going through reading lists that white
the government anti-terror. I mean,
that's right. Yes, I mean they're not the ones who are banning it. What they're saying is that they've got reading lists for white supremacists and right-wing groups, and Zulu happens to be on it. So is the complete works of Shakespeare, by the way.
Okay.
So you can't really ban that. Now, Michael Caine has said this is absolute nonsense. there's no way that Zulu can inspire extremists. And I tend to agree with him. Zulu is my favourite action film. Every Christmas I'm sitting there in front of it. Well, except this Christmas because Claire decided she'd had enough of Zulu and got me out of the house. So,
on you.
Yeah.
But the whole thing about Zulu is, even though it's 1964, a long time ago, it actually takes on the issue of racism. And so the Michael Caine character, Lieutenant Bromhead in the movie, he is quite clearly a racist, and he's taken to task for being a racist. So the film addresses it. Certainly that the Zulus who took part say, look, that we were perfectly happy to do so. Of course, there's a question over whether Britain should have invaded Zululand in 1879, but that's a different issue. The film itself is reasonably accurate. It's a bit of our history, and why the right-wing groups think that it's inspirational is beyond me.
Yeah. Oh well. Good on Michael Caine for calling it out. Claire, what's the eye saying about NIMBYism? People don't want reservoirs.
I mean,
they want water.
and I think this, sort of herein lies the problem. People don't want reservoirs, but we all want water, and we have seen that we've had some of the driest conditions on record. I think February was one of the driest that we've ever had. I appreciate now that we have snow and a lot of rain, but it doesn't last forever, and all of those reservoirs have been so poorly filled over at least the last 18 months that we need to build more. But unfortunately, district councils, county councils are saying no. This is a blot on our landscape. Now, I would much rather live next door to a reservoir than, for example, a thousand house development.
Yeah.
I think that you can do them sensitively. We need to understand we need water. I don't get what the objection is. You're not going to have an awful lot of antisocial behaviour around a reservoir. No. You might encourage some beautiful birds and wildlife, which is good for the environment. Now, surely we should be looking at things like that. And this is what Water UK, or the industry body, said, that unless we build them, this is going to be a land without water.
Yeah.
And that's frightening.
I mean, it's like a bit of common sense. And actually, I don't think they're a blot on the landscape. They tend to look quite nice,
Well, I think they do, and they can be sensitively done, and birds and butterflies are beautiful things.
A nice place to go walk around, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got to leave it there, you two. We'll talk about Bear Grylls in the next one, Nigel.
OK.
That's a great story.
Yeah, I like that
Claire,
story as
Nigel,
well.
thanks very much indeed. Now, let's just... I tell you what we'll do. We'll go straight to. We'll talk about the weather. We'll go through some. We'll go through some pictures in a little while, because what I want to do is find out what is happening across parts of the UK, because there are amber warnings for strong winds and heavy snow, particularly in the north at the moment.
Yes, temperatures last night were the coldest reported in March in more than a decade, with parts of North Wales and the north-east of England recording up to 40 centimetres of snow.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of places really badly hit. Let's catch up with Tony Maguire, who's in Glasgow for us this morning. What's it like there, Tony?
Good morning. Well, Glasgow had a bit of a light dusting last night. I'd say in the higher ground, it's definitely a bit deeper. I live to the north of the city, where I'm a wee bit higher than where I am now in Queen's Park in the south side. We were looking at about 4 or 5 inches this morning. Now, the real fun and games started kind of about halfway through yesterday, where Edinburgh looked like it had 2 back-to-back yellow warnings in place for snow and ice. With Glasgow, all of their yellow warnings were taken away. And then come to last night, Edinburgh looks like it's had no snow this morning, and Glasgow is looking pristine, as you can see behind me. Certainly over the last fortnight, Scotland has really struggled to get above the 0 degrees mark, so I think this was expected, certainly. I know that the snow came down quite thick and fast last night, but looking at the weather for the next couple of days, it certainly looks nice and sunny, so definitely today at the very least is going to be a great day for Instagram accounts around the Glasgow area. What I will say is that there on Wednesday this week, of course, we had a huge dump of snow in the northeast, and on Wednesday we saw one of the coldest temperatures of the year so far, and in fact the coldest temperature recorded in March since 2010 up in Altnahara in the Highlands. So Scotland is going through a quasi-typical March, I would say, but certainly no school closures from what I can see, although I'll be sure to keep you informed should that change.
What a shame. There'll be loads of people wishing for a school closure this morning. It was always the way. Tony, thank you. Let's head to West Yorkshire. Paul Hawkins is there for us. Paul, oh, now that looks a bit thicker where you are.
Oh, yes, it certainly is. The plan was that we would wake up and bring you the latest from Hebden Bridge. But I'll be honest, I wasn't really listening to the advice that I was dishing out yesterday, and so we got stuck in the snow on a hill on a minor road, and then ended up having to help some other cars get out of the snow and up the hill, push them up the hill, and then someone gave us a little push, and then the gritter turned up. And then we're very lucky to have checked into the Windmill Court Hotel next to the A629. We're just a couple of miles north of Halifax, and as you can see, they haven't just had a light dusting here. They've had a good 5 inches. Look, I mean, look at it in the ground. If you can get your foot right in here. This is the resting snow that's here. Essentially, east of the Pennines has had the most of the snow. To be honest, I know you can. If you're watching us in Salford at the moment, you'll think, what's all the fuss about, because there isn't any snow there. But essentially, east of the Pennines, we've had the majority of the snow, and the amber warning still in place here until 9 a.m. It's going to get to a toasty 0 degrees later. The sun will come out, but then tonight, with no cloud cover, it's going to drop to -7. So any resting snow, not on these main roads that are being kept cleared by the gritters and by the snowplows, but on the minor roads where the snow will stay, that will then freeze overnight and become very difficult for motorists. So yeah, more difficulties to come probably tomorrow morning on the minor roads.
Yes, Paul. Well, it looks very beautiful behind you, but we can hear that wind. It does look as though people have heeded your advice, and that road behind you is looking very quiet. So good luck getting around today, Paul.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Now, let's just have a reflection, should we, on Mystic Meg, whether you believe it all or not. She's a name you will know. She's died at the age of 80. Let's talk to fellow astrologer Marjorie Orr, who joins us now. Morning, Marjorie. What are we to make of Mystic Meg? Because I always thought, whatever her qualifications or skills, if you like, that the whole lottery business made a bit of a mockery out of it all, didn't it?
Well, Mystic Meg came from a Romany background. Her grandmother was an astrologer. She had a basic astrological background, but she became a media phenomenon. The media used her, and she was a very astute businesswoman. And she kind of fed into people's need, A, to be entertained, but also to get some certainty in their life. People, as even more so nowadays, don't know what's happening. They don't know how to cope. And she kind of fed in an amusing kind of way that made money for her into this. And I think it feeds into that problem that a huge number of people believe in astrology. They reckon about 90% of people think the astrological science makes sense, but the media has always treated it like a joke. Because they get embarrassed by it. They can't take it seriously. And they put it on the cartoon page. And to be fair, she really wasn't just an astrologer. She was a crystal ball gazer. And crystal balls, I have never been near a crystal ball. I don't understand how they work. And it's a different skill set, if you like, which can give very accurate answers and very inaccurate ones. But she homed into the, if you live in Sunderland and were born under the sign of Scorpio, you're going to win 10 million. Of course, it cheered people up, you know, who were living through, as they are now, very uncertain times. But she damaged astrology. She damaged the reputation of astrology. The serious community really didn't like her. But, you know, she publicized it in a way that I suppose helped people. And at the end of the day, if you know, whatever gets you through the day, whatever floats your boat, it gets you through. But there is a serious side to astrology that the media will not touch.
No,
and people like you tend to kind of diminish it because it embarrasses you. And one of these days, before I pass on to the next incarnation, we will make a breakthrough.
Well, you may well do. I hate to say it, Marjorie. We're out of time, but it's really good to see you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. We are very tight for time this morning. We're back with the headlines in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, I'm Michael Portillo. You can join me every Sunday on GB News. Remember to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel and to download the GB News app to stay up to date with the latest GB News content. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Several people have been killed after a gunman opened fire in northern Germany last night.
Good morning to you. It's 1 minute past 8 on Friday, the 10th of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie. Here are your top stories.
A quick warning, the following does contain flashing images. Now, as many as 8 people have been killed and multiple others have been injured in Germany after a gunman stormed a Jehovah's Witness hall, according to local reports. Our Home and Security Editor Mark White will be joining us shortly to bring you up to date.
With details of the new immigration bill emerging this week, the PM is heading to Paris this morning for talks with his French counterpart, all about the small boats crisis. We talked to the Foreign Secretary and the Shadow Immigration Minister in the last hour. We'll tell you what they had to say.
Well, this comes as GB News' People poll reveals a majority of voters agree with the government and think those arriving illegally across the Channel should be removed from the UK and blocked from returning. We'll be digesting that and much more with our polling throughout the morning.
Loads of you getting in touch this morning on the French issue, talking about migration and what should be discussed in all of that. Nursery fees as well is proving a pretty popular topic, as is the weather where you are, of course. If you want to let us know about anything that's happening where you are, we'd love to hear from you. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
We start this morning with some breaking news overnight. Local reports say at least 8 people have been killed in a shooting at a Jehovah's Witness meeting hall in northern Germany. Police say the incident happened at around 9 p.m. last night and the gunman acted alone and is thought to be dead.
Well, let's talk to our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Am I right in thinking that death toll has increased in the last hour?
Well, the local reports say up to 8 people, but it's been fluctuating between 8 and 6 really since about midnight last night. So we will just have to wait for the exact word from the police on that. And I think that would also include the gunman who we believe shot himself or herself upstairs in this building. There was a shot rang out as police were searching the building and they found the body of an individual upstairs. It was just after 9, as you said in your introduction there. This building's only about half a mile or so from the police headquarters, so local police, and in Germany, of course, they're armed anyway, were on scene pretty quickly, but the specialist firearms teams who would push into a building and go forward looking for casualties and any gunmen were on scene within minutes as well. And of course, they found an absolutely awful sight of multiple gunshot victims. Some of those had succumbed to their injuries. Others were pulled from the building, just quite literally by armed police as they took them to waiting medics outside. This is what a local police spokesman told reporters in the early hours this morning.
The police were relatively close by and then went into the building quite quickly. The police officers who went in found people who may have been seriously injured by firearms, some of them fatally. The officers also heard a shot from the upper part of the building and went upstairs, where they also found a person. So far, we have no indication that any perpetrators fled. We now have to carry out the evaluation of the crime scene. At the moment, we have no clues about the victims. All we know is that several people have died here. Several people have been injured. They have been taken to hospitals. I cannot give any information on the background at the moment. This is all still speculation. All we know is that the event took place this evening. In what framework and what the tenor of the event was is still unclear. It happened in a building of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but the reasons are still completely unclear.
Stattgefunden, aber die Hintergründe sind noch komplett unklar.
Well, as you can just hear there, we are in the early stages of this investigation. Do we know anything about a possible motive yet?
No, we know, of course, that Christian facilities have been targeted in various countries around the world by Islamist extremists in the past, but there's no indication that's what happened on this occasion. I mean, the fact that the suspected perpetrator is believed to have taken her own life inside the building doesn't necessarily follow the pattern of the way that Islamist attackers would operate. It's a showdown with the police, or they go on to try and target other locations or just flee the area. So probably best to be a bit circumspect on that aspect, and the police are urging local members of the public not to speculate. Again, people in that area have been talking about hearing gunshots, short bursts that were ringing out over a period of time that would be sadly sort of indicative of someone going from room to room and looking for victims. This is what one eyewitness told us.
Schüsse gehört? Die haben Schüsse gehört? Also ich weiß ja.
We heard gunshots. I know what gunshots sound like. And the 12 continuous shots. I thought it was something at the construction site here, but then it's supposed to have been somehow at the petrol station or next door at the Jehovah's Witnesses. We took some pictures and saw people being taken away in black bags. That's all we saw. We didn't see any perpetrators or anything like that, but only what happened here shortly afterwards.
I mean, it's shocking for a whole community, obviously, Mark, never mind the country as a whole, actually. What's happening in terms of the investigation today?
Well, they'll be trying to establish exactly who this gunman was. As I say, the fact is they believe that this person took their own life, and they should be able fairly quickly, and probably have done already, established who they are, which will be clearly a step forward in trying then to determine what the motivation was. Was this person, for instance, known to any of the worshippers at this particular facility? That's one of the avenues that they'll be exploring. What we've got is forensic teams at the moment carrying out a detailed search, room by room, as they piece together the exact sequence of events.
OK, Mark, for now, thank you.
Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is set to meet French President Emmanuel Macron today in Paris. It will be the first summit between both countries in 5 years.
Well, they're expected to agree on a joint drive to try to prevent migrants crossing the Channel in small boats through a multi-year financing plan.
Well, this would mean Britain would pay millions of pounds to France yearly to ramp up patrols on French beaches. So, what is Macron's price?
Let's talk to our political reporter, Olivia Utley, who's here with us this morning. There's a lot of people, and you can understand the frustration saying, why are we handing a load of more money to France? But if this is going to stop people from crossing the Channel in the first place, and James cleverly telling us, well, what we've paid so far does seem to be paying off, then it could be a step in the right direction.
Yes, there's certainly an argument that it's necessary to try and stop the boats, but you can see the point for the Conservative MPs who say that over the last 5 years, we've spent $232 million on stopping the boats, and all that we've seen is a rise in the number of boats coming over. So you could definitely argue that this deal is necessary. This deal is going to cost £75 million in the first year alone. You could definitely argue that it's necessary in order to essentially just improve relations with the French. And we know that over the last couple of years, relations with the French have been at a pretty much all-time low. Liz Truss refused to say whether Emmanuel Macron was a friend or a foe. And Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron were hardly on speaking terms by the end of Johnson's premiership. So it's a good news, generally, that the summit is happening. These summits used to happen once a year. There hasn't been one for 5 years. And one could argue that handing this money over to the French, which obviously is a drop in the ocean compared to other national budgets, is a sort of price worth paying simply to get that relationship up and running again. But whether the actual money will do very much to stop the boats when the $232 million that we've already spent doesn't seem to have had a massive effect is another question.
What are we to make of Stephen Kinnock earlier on was saying the big problem here is the returns policy, and since Brexit we pulled out of the Dublin Agreement. Now, is that the issue? Is that why the numbers have gone up? Is Rishi Sunak, in effect, trying to get us back into that Dublin Agreement?
Well, there is certainly an issue there. And what Rishi Sunak originally wanted was a bilateral deal with the French in order to send back migrants who'd come from France to Britain, just send them straight back to France. The Elysée has poured cold water on that idea. That's not going to happen. The second best option for Rishi Sunak is some sort of deal like the Dublin Agreement with the entirety of the EU. That doesn't look like it's going to be agreed imminently, but it's certainly something which might be on the table eventually. And that might be one of the good reasons to agree to this multi-million-pound deal over the next few years with the French, in order basically to soften the ground to get to some sort of agreement, a whole EU-wide agreement with these countries, so that eventually we could be in something like the Dublin Agreement.
Without these return policies, though, and France, as you say, have said that isn't on the table for today, but without these return policies with France and with the EU, then aren't we putting the cart before the horse? We're putting out all of this legislation, but without those return policies in place, there's a high probability that this isn't going to make any impact at all.
Well, there is definitely an argument for that. I mean, the legislation which is having its second reading on Monday, this new small boats legislation, would involve sending migrants to a third country, so somewhere like Rwanda. So that isn't necessarily dependent on any sort of mutual agreement with the EU or with France. But there is this question of assuming that this legislation manages to get through Parliament and then doesn't get too bogged down in the Lords, and that's a huge assumption because everyone thinks that probably it will get very bogged down. There's a question of what's going to happen to migrants after the 28 days while their cases are being reviewed. So there are quite a lot of issues with this new legislation which definitely need to be tied up, and some sort of agreement with the French or with the EU in the meantime would definitely do a lot of good. Whether, just going back for a second to Brexit and whether it is the fault of Brexit, the Dublin Agreement actually didn't see us returning that many migrants to the EU. In practice, it didn't work as well as it sounded like it would in theory. So it's difficult to sort of pin it all on Brexit, the number of migrants coming over now. There are other global changes which is causing this rise. But one way or another, Rishi Sunak does need to have a better relationship with the EU generally and Emmanuel Macron in particular if he's going to really tackle this issue.
See, it's interesting because, I mean, from a political point of view and how the Labour Party play with this as well, because in our GB News People's poll out this morning, obviously more than 50%, or the majority anyway, I should say, because I haven't seen the exact figures, to be fair, but the majority, 52%, I'm told, back this policy, which doesn't come as a great surprise in a sense, but the vast majority, 40% of people also say they don't trust either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer to deal with it.
Well, yes, I think this is the really salient issue for Rishi Sunak. He knows that stopping the boats is a huge priority for the country. And the fact that we even keep hearing this phrase, stopping the boats, it's come out of focus groups. Stopping the boats is, I think, the number 2 issue for Tory 2019 voters and the number 4 issue for all voters generally. So he needs to find a way to do this. And he also knows that if he can do this, if he can show that he's making progress, making headway on stopping the boats, then that is a way for him to draw clear blue water between himself and Labour. Because although Yvette Cooper has sort of generally said, yes, she would like to see net migration come down, the top 5 priorities for Keir Starmer when he laid them out a couple of weeks ago did not include stopping the boats, or it didn't really include anything about immigration at all. He only made a passing reference to immigration. So Sunak wants to own this issue. But of course, the voters are probably right to have a few misgivings about the way that he plans to tackle it, because there are certainly some holes in this legislation which need patching up.
Yeah. OK. Olivia, thanks very much indeed. It's interesting. Linda's been in touch. Morning to you, Linda, who says it's all very well saying illegal immigrants will be sent back to Europe, but who exactly will take them? And you've hit the nail on the head, haven't you, with that? I mean, that's the problem. It's the returns policy, which, to be fair, is what Stephen Kinnock from the Labour Party, the Shadow Immigration Minister, was saying this morning. Of course, it's easy for the opposition party to say to an extent, but they're going to, as Olivia was saying, they're going to have to come up with something ahead of the next election, because it is a big electoral issue.
It certainly is. And Sandra makes a good point. She says, I think the jump in numbers crossing is because Labour took us into a war that destabilised that part of the world. So they are responsible for some of these high numbers that want to come to this country. Certainly a point. Let us know what you think. GBviews at GBnews.uk.
It is a point. I guess any government of any colour would have done much the same thing under those circumstances, you would imagine. But it doesn't mean it's not a valid point, Sandra. OK, let's bring you up to date with some of the other stories this morning at 8:15. And in the last hour, it's been announced that the UK economy grew by 0.3% in January. It's the latest data from the Office for National Statistics, and it shows, well, a bounce back, sort of, from the large fall seen in December last year. The Chancellor says it proves the economy is more resilient than people expected, but he did say there is a long way to go. It is virtually flat, but it's not, at least, in negative territory.
At least it's in the right direction. Now, an MP has said ministers should absolutely not give honours to family members. It's after reports Boris Johnson plans to include his father, Stanley, on his resignation honours list. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says he believes it isn't sensible or wise to nominate a family for a knighthood.
The Labour leader has pledged to prioritise Scottish innovation to boost the economy. Sir Keir Starmer says Scotland's creativity has been held back by governments at Holyrood and Westminster. Sir Keir will visit Glasgow later with the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves to discuss his plans. think about Stanley Johnson?
What do I make about him?
Well, yeah, what do you think about him? And you know, the possibility of I think it's a is it knighthood, Olivia, they're talking about?
It's a knighthood, yeah.
I mean, I just think as much as... he's a very charismatic man.
Yeah.
And
as is Boris Johnson.
He has so. He's an MEP. You know, it's not as though he's not been involved in the political sphere. But nominated, you're put forward in the resignation honours list. That can't... Who would think that would be a good move? It was just going to get criticism.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? But what do you think? gbviews@gbnews.uk.
The optics aren't good, are they?
All about... We talk a lot about optics at the moment.
Do.
Should optics matter? Well, they ultimately do. It's that whole thing about saying, well, it doesn't smell right.
No. Well, if you're deciding on who you can put in the House of Lords, perhaps your father maybe isn't the best look.
No.
But let us know what you think about that. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We're talking about lots of things this morning, but of course we're British. We're talking a lot about the weather.
Oh, quite right.
Of course. Lots of snow. We've got some lovely snow pictures. We've been asking for them today. So David's been in touch. And this is a photo, I believe he sent us in, saying, a view from my part of the world in West Yorkshire.
That looks beautiful.
And if you're listening on the radio, it's a lovely garden with would you call that a trellis?
It is well, it's an archway.
An archway. With a trellis?
No, it's just an archway. I have one.
You can tell I don't have a garden and you do.
Yeah, you need a nice archway like that. They're lovely.
Very nice, very nice.
Jacqueline, morning, Jacqueline, says, good morning, GB News team. Here's a picture of my beautiful snowy morning in Barrowford in Lancashire. And again, it's a garden scene.
It's a balcony, isn't it?
How much snow is on that little table? It looks about 4 inches, 5 inches deep on that table.
And that barbecue's not going to be used for some time, I think.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
At least the next couple of weeks. Keith's been in touch saying it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas.
There's a song in there somewhere.
There is. Ooh,
where are you, Keith? We haven't got a location for that.
It looks like a chapel or a church or a very frosty
church
chapel
somewhere, but it's proper Christmas card, that.
Yeah, it is.
And James, hi James. Again, I don't know where James is from. We need to put it on your
locations,
emails,
please,
because then we like to see whereabouts in the country we are. This is a picture from our kitchen window.
I'm going to say Yorkshire because it's got that lovely Yorkshire stone.
It does have a sort of Yorkshire look about it, doesn't it? From what you can tell.
Do you know, you're very lucky I'm here today. I was up in Yorkshire yesterday and the snow was coming down and I woke up and there was about 4 inches on the ground and I thought, oh dear,
did you drive back
London.
or did you
no,
train?
Did I drive back? No. I got the train. I was very nervous, but I must say,
you're not very good at driving in good conditions, are you?
I'm not. That's true, actually. Very, very true. So I wasn't going to risk it in the snow, and even my mum said, "Yeah, don't do that, darling.
Yeah.
I'll drive you if I need to." So I got the train.
Oh, right.
And it was all running fine and it was perfect. We've got another photo for you from Margaret in Sheffield, who says it's been snowing all night, I think, and it's still continuing to snow.
Absolutely.
That's a lovely garden in Sheffield there.
I tell you what, what is that cable? Is it your phone line?
Washing line?
I think it might be. Is it your phone line, Margaret? You look like you could zip wire down that.
I know, it looks fun, doesn't it?
It looked absolutely fantastic.
And a couple of people have tweeted us as well. So Sarah Louise says, good morning from you both. I'm going to get these photos. I'll send them over to the team now. But she's watching from a snowy Leicester before going to work. So good morning to you, Sarah. Hope you have a lovely day at work. And Danny Murray has sent a lovely garden picture. And he says, this garden in the spring, would you believe it? And it's thick snow in his garden. Where's spring gone, he says.
I love it, the garden pictures, if you've got a little table, because then you can see how much snow has actually fallen. I love all of that. Anyway, keep your thoughts coming through. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
And your snow pictures, please.
Snow pictures. Now, police responding to mental health incidents have seen cases increase up to 5 times in the last 5 years in some parts of the UK. Now, that's according to a new report out today.
Yes, 21 forces out of 48 in England, Scotland and Wales answered a BBC Freedom of Information request, and they each recorded a rise since 2017.
Yeah, in Merseyside, mental health-related incidents climbed from about 7,000 in 2017 to 28,000 last year. That's a 313% rise.
Well, ex-Scotland Yard detective Mike Neville joins us this morning. Good morning to you. So tell us, do you think, so Mark Rowley's been talking about this, he says police officers are spending too much time responding to what he calls social and health work. What do you make of those comments?
Well, having spoken to frontline officers, this is exactly the case. So rather than dealing with burglaries and rapes and robberies, officers' time is spent dealing with people with all sorts of tragic issues, but they're really health issues and social issues, as you've identified. And Sir Mark Rowley was saying that for each person they deal with, it's an average of 14 hours of a police officer's time. So that's 14 hours when the officer isn't on the street, isn't looking for knives, isn't dealing with the public, isn't helping. So there really needs to be some work on this. And I know there's some good work, as you mentioned, in Merseyside and Humberside, but lots of forces do not have any specialist liaison with their mental health nurse where they can go out and deal with these issues. So the net result is you just have officers sat for hours and hours and hours at accidents and emergency and not on the streets doing the job they're paid to do.
So Mike, why is this happening then? Because, I mean, obviously there are some incidents, it may involve someone who's having some sort of breakdown, some sort of mental health incident, and it requires a police involvement. We can understand those sort of situations. But why is it that it is now falling under a police remit rather than, say, almost dropping people off to carers in a hospital or a unit or something that are specialists and can deal with that?
Well, sometimes it's disorganisation, and the public sector can be very disorganised. We know the NHS it can be quite bad, and the other thing with the police, of course, is that they're always in the police when the social services pack up the bags and go home at 5 o'clock. The police station's open, and so there's always an officer ready to deal. And I think the police have been too willing to deal with this, and they've allowed this to happen. So they've made the situation work, where there should have been some kickback several years ago about this. And it's only now, when we've got these figures showing how many hours are lost, that senior officers are thinking, oh my God, we've got to do something about it, because they're almost like happy in the last 5 years not to deal with crime. I did a Freedom of Information Act request which showed that 70% of the Met officers hadn't arrested anybody in a year. And no one had done anything about that. But now the Home Secretary is saying you've got to get a grip, you've got to get the burglary detection rate up, you've got to solve more robberies and rapes and the like. And now it's impacted on senior officers and possibly their promotion. And so they're going to do something about it. But it's the hard-working officers at the bottom who have to clear up the mess all the time.
Isn't it always the case, though, sadly? Mike, it's really good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. I've said this time and time again, I've got a lot of respect for police officers. I know they're getting a bad rap at the moment. There's been some horrific cases and some very, very questionable behaviour that is quite rightly being looked into. But the vast majority of police officers do an incredible job under incredible pressure for actually not a lot of money in a lot of cases. And they keep us safe, and we've got to bear that in mind when there's all this criticism floating about.
Yeah, certainly is.
I feel passionate about that, actually.
Well, it's a very, very difficult job, isn't it? A really shocking statistic there from Mike. 70% Met officers hadn't made an arrest in a year. And I mean, when we're talking about trust in the police, and as you say, more than 90% are doing a fantastic job.
Way over.
But there was a poll out yesterday saying that I think it was 4% of Londoners now trust in the Metropolitan Police. So perhaps making arrests, catching criminals and Bobby's on the beat, that's going to be the first steps towards getting that trust back, because as you say, they do a really important job, and 99% of them are doing an absolutely wonderful job, aren't they?
Yeah, I would agree. Your views on that is we can agree with each other.
We can chat about this all morning.
What do you think?
Yeah.
That's what matters. GB Views @gbnews.uk. It almost doesn't matter what we think, it's what you think that counts. Still to come, we're going to have all the sport. Ada McGee's here in a couple of minutes.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken,
How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Are you doing this, Doll?
Yeah, I'll do it, thanks. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
Time for the latest sport. Aidan's here. Morning, Aidan.
Good morning to you both. How are you?
Yeah, all right. Now, look, Man United, they reclaimed a little bit of the honour last night.
They did, yeah. So I don't know if you remember when we discussed the defeat against Brentford back in August, I think it was. They lost 4-0. And I think Eric Ten Hag, the manager, worked out afterwards, based on his statistical analysis, that Brentford had ran 8 miles longer or more in that match than United had. So he made the squad run 8 miles coming to training next day.
I do remember that.
And he went through and to teach him a lesson. He was early in his reign. A lot's happened since then. Last night it was not the same as that, but they lost 7-0 obviously last week against Liverpool. It was a very embarrassing defeat. And what's unheard of is that you go into the Europa League and you play the same team that lost to Liverpool a few days before. Normally you make changes because it's a second-line tournament. They really want to be in the Champions League. Let's not get carried away. But he put the same side out last night. And yes, they won 4-1. Bruno Fernandes retained the captaincy. He was the guy who was accused at the Liverpool game of throwing his hands in the air and kind of, detaching himself from the performance, really saying it's all his teammates' fault. He was retained for the captaincy.
I did that when things go wrong here.
Yeah,
it's all Ellie's fault.
He does.
And often yours, Aidan.
Yeah, I know. Well, I hold my hands up, don't I? But I don't wave them around. No, that's a different thing. So there was some speculation that he might be stripped of the captaincy, but he is also a stellar performer, and he proved it last night. And they beat Real Betis 4-1. And Real Betis are 5th in La Liga in Spain. They've won the last 3 games. They're no mugs, but it is only the Europa League. Yeah. And so we can't get too carried away. The big thing for them is the big game for them is going to be Southampton at the weekend. But they've got a bit of battle on now to finish in the top 4. It was taken as read a few weeks ago, but that defeat last week and other clubs around them winning matches has put them in a difficult position. But nonetheless, they'll be pleased with that last night.
Yeah, so no changes then in the squad for Man United, but changes for Arsenal.
Oh, goodness me, yeah, 6 changes. So that's what you're meant to do in the Europa League game. You have this game, it's a second-line tournament, so you make changes, you put some of your reserve team players in. And the goalkeeper, Matt Turner, came in last night instead of Aaron Ramsdale. They got a 2-2 draw in Portugal. Now, I don't really know why they're involved in this tournament, because they're already going to be finishing the top 4 as it is. They've got a massive race now between now on the finish line to win the Premier League. They've got games coming. They've got 3 games in 9 days. Fulham away, that'll be very tough because they're having a very good season. They've got the return leg against Sporting at home next week, and then they've got Crystal Palace at home. On paper, they're not really difficult opponents for a side that's top of the league. But look at the struggle they had against Bournemouth last week. They conceded a goal within 9.1 seconds, as long as it takes us to get to the toilet here.
Yeah.
So that's 6 changes for them, and yeah, look, they got through it.
I mean, just in case you wondered, ladies and gents, that's it's how close the toilet.
You got to know where the toilet is, I suppose, haven't you?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, we'll do a video later. So yeah. So yeah, they've got through it, but I think they might pay for it later in the season. It's no good piling up your fixtures when you're going for the Premier League. The prize is so big. They haven't won it since 2004. He thinks that by getting into the Europa League, it's usually a way of getting into the Champions League. If you win it, you get direct entry in the Champions League. I think Arsenal are going to get in the Champions League anyway because they're going to finish in the top 4. I don't know why they're getting involved in it, and he was disappointed with it, but they didn't lose.
Yeah. Should we have a word on the Six Nations? We've got 2 big matches this weekend, don't we?
Interesting weekend, yeah. So England are up against France tomorrow. One of our colleagues is going to the game. I've just been talking to him about it. Yeah, they've named the side. They've dropped the captain, Owen Farrell. Will he be back for the World Cup? I suggest he probably will. Ollie Lawrence is coming in. Marcus Smith, my guy, not really trusted by Eddie Jones previously. But also, England get back at Twickenham tomorrow, and that's quite important because I don't know if you remember Clive Woodward, England's World Cup winning coach a few years ago, saying Twickenham are turned into the world's biggest pub. He's basically saying that because the fans are allowed to drink within view of the pitch, which has been a common practice in rugby anyway for the last however many years, but it's detracting from the support the players are getting on the day of the games. So people are going out of their seat, back and forth, a bit like the theatre. Actually, no, not in the theatre. You don't get that as much, do you? People going for a drink during the actual play.
Yeah, people do that.
Yeah, but in rugby,
well,
it's
how common. How common.
But people are sitting down there in the seats and they're just going back and forth and they're distracted from the game.
Yeah.
Clive Woodward said if you're going to make your home ground a fortress, then your fans need to be engaged. They need to be on top of things. Yeah. And that's why he got a lot of criticism actually for it, just for saying that Twickenham had become the world's biggest pub. But maybe he had a point.
I think he's got a point.
There might be some truth in that.
Yeah, maybe. So. You're not allowed to drink within view of the pitch in football, you see.
Right.
So that's different. No, you're not.
That's so true, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So, and then big game on Sunday, Scotland against Ireland. Ireland can't. They could win it if results go their way tomorrow, but that's a huge game against Scotland. They're both going really well.
Lovely stuff. You're going to be back a little bit later on.
Yeah, not too far away from
we're on right through till 10 o'clock today. How's the weight loss going, by the way? Have you lost any more since last week?
Yeah, about 11 pounds now, actually. Yeah,
I need 3 pounds in the last week.
Yeah. So I've been on it for 8 weeks. So a pound a week. I'm probably ahead of that, actually. I need to eat up. I need to have a big cream cake.
Yeah. Oh, good.
You got one for me? Got to pay for one for me? Or no?
I'll buy you a cake.
All right, fine.
Yeah, I'll buy you a cake.
Right.
Men are so annoying because you're on a health kick as well, aren't you? But it just falls off you.
Oh,
I think for women it's a lot harder. Men, you just don't.
A lot of it's water. You have to be careful.
Do you think?
I've got a diabetic appointment this afternoon as well.
Oh, have you?
So I wanted to be absolute peak condition.
Oh, you see that? I knew there was a reason.
I shouldn't really have gone to Scream 6 last night.
No, I know what it's like when you have your annual diabetic MOT, and they get you on the scales. It's like, hate it.
I'll put my hands in the air when I see my weight loss come back.
Oh, yeah. That's the thing. Good on you. We'll catch up with you in an hour.
Well.
Is yours going well, your health kick?
Yeah,
but not as quick as that, though. It's coming down a little bit.
Speedy.
Yeah. Anyway, now, much more to come, including the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's still got secrets, believe it or not. We'll tell you what they are in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
8:39, good morning to you, watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
And let's have a look at today's front pages for you now. And the HS2 line between London and Manchester may not be ready until at least 2041, that's according to the Times.
The Eye also leading on that as ministers try to make savings in the face of inflation.
The Guardian reports that at least 500 people have died after ambulance delays last year.
BBC staff left boiling with anger at Gary Lineker after he sparked an impartiality row with comments about the government's migrant policies. That's in the Mail.
The Express leads on Gary Lineker's comments, reporting that the BBC is under pressure to make him apologise.
The Telegraph leads with concern over sex education, saying current guidance places no limits on what can be taught to children.
The Sun has news of what it describes as another wag war.
And the Daily Star says Prince Harry has spent the last 3 years moaning about being a royal, but has now declared his children have a right to be a prince and princess. I've just worked out what the Wag War story is.
What is it?
Well, that it's Wag War 2, and that means it's about Colleen and what's-her-face, isn't it?
Oh, it's somebody else now.
But I've now...
It's Becky Vardy and Annie Walker. Do you know who that is? I don't.
No idea, but it's only taken me 3 hours. Anyway, let's go through the papers with Conservative Party advisor Claire Pearsall, long-suffering wife of Nigel Nelson, who's political editor for the Sunday Mirror and Sunday People. Good to see you both this morning. But you're happy as Larry, you two, aren't you? Yeah. Which is a nice thing. To the Mail, Nigel. Let's have a look at the pension cap.
Yeah, I mean, this is all the budget speculation which is coming up when Jeremy Hunt presents it for next Wednesday. As Claire mentioned earlier, there's an extension of free childcare on the books, reason being to try and get people back into work. The labour market's very tight, and one of the things the Chancellor wants to do is to see if he can encourage people back. And this is another way of doing it by helping out people with pensions. So at the moment, you have a lifetime allowance which is tax-free of about £1 million. You can put in 40,000 a year tax-free again into your pension. He wants to raise that on the basis that that would encourage people who've left work and then they can go back into work. So the other way of doing that is that if you draw down some of your pension, that you can only then get £4,000 back if you're in contributions if you join the workplace. That looks like being changed as well.
Right.
So the whole idea is to try and encourage people, especially over 50s who decided not to go back to work after the pandemic, try and get them back in again.
Money well spent?
I think it is. I do think it is. I think we need to look at the way we deal with pensions, considering that we are all living longer, we're working for longer, and certainly as the pension age keeps increasing, I'll be 104 by the time I'm entitled to it, by the time I get there.
Yeah.
So I think that some flexibility around it does need to be worked in. Of course it's going to cost, but also pensioners shouldn't be moved out of this system because of the cost of it when they have paid into the system for their working life. So I think we need to look at all ways of doing it. But I think flexibility in the pension system is a must, and we need to look more at how we do that.
Yeah, and especially with the whole issues around the care system and how we pay and deal with people in their dotage.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, it's like, well, if you can encourage people to save more money and be self-funding in that way, all the better.
This is the whole idea. I mean, obviously it costs him a bit because he loses tax out of it, but beyond that, all you're doing is actually twiddling around with allowances.
Yeah.
And at the moment, he's got somewhere between 30 billion he didn't expect to have, maybe even up to 100 billion, which he can start spending. So it won't be on tax cuts, but it could be on things like this.
Yeah, well, you know, good.
Should we talk about the weather, Claire? Because we love to talk about the weather, don't we? And this is quite rare, I'd say, snow in March. And there are warnings in the Express.
No, I mean, I think it's more common than you realise. And I was certainly flicking back through photographs of mine of when we had snow at Easter, sort of early April. So it's not unusual. I think what is unusual is the level of snow that we've seen and the particular snowstorms that are going on across parts of the Midlands and the North at the moment. 50-mile-an-hour snowstorms. It sounds a bit
that's
like
blizzard, isn't it?
It is blizzard conditions. It sounds a little bit like a film, and it was quite interesting, Ellie, what you were saying about driving. I think that we aren't good at driving in the snow as a nation. We aren't used to it. We don't get taught it. We don't travel with the right things. We don't have blankets in the car and all stuff like that. And when you look at this weather and people stopped on the motorways as they currently are, I think it's the M62, which is an absolute gridlock, we need to be a little bit better. We need to be better prepared. I think these kind of extreme weather conditions are going to continue. And this one is particularly appalling at the moment, and the winds behind it don't help. But the photographs that come through are stunningly beautiful. I mean, it's sort of a thing in two halves, if you like.
Yeah, we need a sort of winter driving grab bag.
We need, we need lessons or something. My auntie's over from Canada at the moment, and she's been watching us this week, and she's absolutely appalled by our lack of preparation. And she's like, "Oh, have you got the snow chains in the back of the car? Have you got special tyres to put on?" And we're like,
No.
I don't even know how to drive a car in ice. So, I mean, it is just
it is
perhaps something we need to be a bit more prepared for, especially as we're seeing more extreme weather.
And I've sort of grown up in the countryside, so we've had these kind of weathers. It was actually my dad who taught me how to drive in snow and not to panic if you start to slide and how to drive into it, take your feet off the pedals. It's really, really important, because otherwise you panic and then you're going to go into a hedge or a ditch and it's going to get a lot worse.
When the snow was really... We had some really bad snow in the sort of 70s and things, didn't we? And I remember that, but you used to get picked up by a tractor.
Did you?
Get in the back of a tractor, on a big box on the back of a tractor, you'd be all right.
So much fun.
That is fun.
There you go. Let's have a look at now. Bear Grylls. I'm a big fan of Bear Grylls.
Good.
I like
Excellent.
Bear Grylls. I
Good.
like the fact of the scouting movement and all the rest of it. Brilliant stuff. And he's big and he's tough. And
So did you know how he got his name?
No.
Well, he's finally revealed it. That the idea was, you know, the idea was, he must have been wrestling a grizzly or something like that, and that's how, you know, a bit of daring do, and that's how he actually got the name. But it turns out that it was his, when he was a baby, his sister, his 8-year-old sister, gave him the name because she thought he was his teddy bear. And so the name...
big softy.
Exactly. So the name stuck after that, and he's been Bear ever since.
Because he is Edward, isn't he?
Edward is the real name, yes,
So,
that's right.
So teddy bear, and off he goes.
So it's actually just that he was really cuddly, not that he was really tough.
Exactly, which somehow destroys the macho image of it, doesn't it?
It does a little bit, but I also think it's quite... He always comes across as a really nice fella, actually.
He does, and it really matches his job now.
Yes,
the
exactly.
Bear Grylls
Yes.
thing, I mean, it's really worked out.
He was
for him.
aptly named by accident.
Yeah.
Wasn't he just?
And there are people that actually name their children Bear now, don't they? I mean, Cheryl Cole's baby is Bear.
Really?
So I actually thought he was named that.
Bear Cole.
Bear Cole. I think it might be Bear Payne because...
Bear Payne?
Bear Payne.
It's even worse.
Liam Payne is the father, yeah, so Bear Payne it must be, wow. It
It gets worse and worse.
does, actually, yeah.
Heck, it does. No, I like it, but the whole wild camping and all that sort of thing, though.
It is, it's really impressive.
I'm all up for a bit of that.
Yeah, you like the great outdoors,
I
don't
do
you?
like the great
He
outdoors,
does.
I do.
And we're talking about dogs now in Crufts.
Yeah, I mean, there
Feels
is...
like this is in The Guardian, because there is a warning, isn't there, after a rise in dog attacks.
That's right, and Crofts are taking the lead, if we're going to use a pun on this one.
Oh, get out.
Here to help, here to help.
Very good.
And looking at dog education classes to make people understand that you can't just treat them as a little toy and mess them around. You actually have to be responsible. Training is absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
And just encouraging people to learn how a dog behaves and how you need to interact with it. And I think we've all seen that with people walking in parks with their dogs off a lead and it runs over and they say, oh, don't worry, it's fine. And it's like, well, it might not be fine for me if your dog jumps up at me. I'm not very happy about that. But also teaching children not to just run over and come out with their hand to stroke a dog. Very, very basic things. Because dogs are absolutely beautiful, they're magnificent, but they are pack animals.
Yeah.
And we need to behave properly around them, but we also need to leave them some space sometimes and not keep petting them and putting on little jackets, even though they do look very cute.
Yeah, no, there's no such thing as a bad dog, is there? It's just bad owners. At the end
And we
of the
did see
day.
a lot of people, didn't we, buy dogs in lockdown and not perhaps appreciate that they are
What they
hard
were
work.
getting,
And
that's
yeah,
the-
and you need
yeah.
to do a lot of research before you buy a dog.
Yes, I mean, we've got cats rather than dogs. That at least that they look after themselves and we don't have to take them out for walks or anything. Although we did during lockdown, in fact. The cats did come for walks with us, yeah.
Yes, there you go.
I must say that the front page of The Guardian is very cute this morning. I mean, if you can get in on that one. It's a lovely little... Is that a dachshund? Is that
I have
that
no
breed?
idea, but it's wearing a snood.
Wearing a little yellow snood.
Oh,
He's dressed for the weather.
Beautiful.
That's for sure.
Well, that's
Which way should I be doing this? Like that?
No, the other way.
Other way.
There you go.
Ah, very, very cute. Even though we're being told not to do that.
Don't do that,
Don't dress
no,
your
it's
dogs up.
very
Don't
bad.
do it, but it does look cute.
Look, thank you both very much indeed. Good to see you both this morning.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Now, the Great Pyramid of Giza is known as the last standing wonder of the ancient world. But now scientists, believe it or not, I mean, after all the years they've been looking at it, they've now found a chamber in the pyramid that could reveal even more about its history.
Well, to help us understand what exactly this means for the tourist attraction, let's speak to a member of the Scan Pyramids team, Jean-Baptiste Moret. Good morning to you, Jean. This is incredible, isn't it? I mean, the pyramids are 4,500 years old, but we're still discovering new things about them.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, it's incredible to this monument has been in front of us for 4,000 years, more than 4,000 years, and still there are many, many, many unknowns and many mysteries. It's amazing.
What's been discovered? What's in this chamber that's been found now?
So there's nothing in the chamber, so no sarcophagi, no mummy or whatever like this. But still, it's a very interesting chamber because it's big, so 9 by 2 meters, so it's a small apartment. You will see in a few seconds, when we entered it, we discovered that the room is not fully finished. So like the walls are not polished or things like this. You see here, we entered the room with the camera and you see the whole room here. So it's a very mysterious room. We have no idea what it was useful for.
Such a mystery, isn't it? It does look like a little room. If you're just listening on the radio, it does look like quite a narrow, thin room. So it is very interesting to see what it could have been used for. How did you come across it? Was it kind of knocking on the wall and thinking, oh, perhaps this is hollow?
Yeah, of course now. So it's been a very long scientific process. So we started 7 years ago to put sensors in the pyramid, and these sensors are measuring muons, which are very small particles that come from the space. So you're actually traversed by muons right now, and by looking at these sensors, it's like getting an X-ray of the pyramid. So we see voids above the sensors, and there are voids that we know, which are the known rooms, and ones that we don't know. And a few years ago, we detected this room and another big room more in the center of the pyramid. So we knew that this room existed, and we spent a lot of time refining this result, getting more data until we knew exactly where it was, and we could put the camera at the right place.
What does this tell us about the Egyptians? Because, I mean, one thing which again, there's huge speculation about what on earth was going on with them. They seem so incredibly advanced for the time compared to the rest of the planet, really. Does this give us any more insight into what was actually happening in that community?
So for now, it's a bit too early to understand all of this. Of course, it's a very new discovery. We need to speak with archaeologists so that they tell us what they think. But clearly, one of the biggest mysteries about the pyramids are how did they build them? They are so big, with stones that are huge, and this kind of form might have been used maybe during construction, maybe to protect things. That helps us to understand, I think, one is the biggest mystery of the pyramid, which is the construction.
Oh, right, yes. Well, look, it's really good to talk to you this morning, Jean. Thank you very much indeed. Someone's dropped a cup of tea where you are, so we'll leave you to clear that mess up. It's really good to see. I tell you what I find fascinating.
What do you find fascinating?
I can't remember. I don't know if it's marble or limestone. Might have been limestone. But the pyramids were covered in white stone, so that they actually shone when the sun was out. They actually, so you could see them from miles away. They were just reflected light, almost like a sort of mirror finish.
Oh, wow.
Of course, all that's gone now. But can you imagine what that must have looked like? Yeah, best part of 5,000 years ago.
It's incredible, really.
What were we doing in this country back then? Yeah, I always think there's
that's for sure.
something funny's going on, but I'm a bit of a...
The aliens built it, you think? Oh, he does.
I do actually have a bit of a... something going on like that. Is that just me?
It is very interesting. Yeah, we had a producer here in the newsroom, Fran, who went to pyramids last week, and she said it's the most claustrophobic experience to go in. No one warned you, and it's really thin and quite scary, but she said incredible.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're going to be back after the weather.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Things calming down a bit today. We still have warnings in place at the moment, but the snow is going to be starting to ease away through the morning thanks to this area of low pressure. That was the one that brought the heavy snow and is still bringing some very strong winds across the southwest and still snow in places, but it is pulling away into the near continent and taking the snow and rain mix with it. So the snow is easing now across northern England, continuing to fizzle out across Wales and disappearing from Northern Ireland too. But still some snow mixed in with rain and sleet over eastern England, even into the afternoon. Snow showers in northern Scotland continue, so potentially icy here. For many, actually, it's a dry and a bright day, quite a bit of sunshine around, but it is cold. Temperatures struggling a bit with those northerly winds, so after things did turn a bit milder yesterday across the south, we're back to single figures at best here, I suspect, further north 4 or 5 degrees. And feeling colder on these North Sea coasts,
with a brisk wind. Same goes for northern Scotland, where further snow flurries are likely this afternoon across the Northern Isles especially. They'll push into the mainland during this evening, so again potentially quite icy, but the snow showers and sleet and rain showers clearing away from eastern England pretty sharply. And then a sharp frost, a hard frost, as we head into the weekend. Temperatures are going to be well below freezing, even in towns and cities, down to -4 or -5, minus double digits likely through some sheltered glens across Scotland. Not quite so cold in the far southwest. We'll probably keep a little bit more cloud here. And we do have some more clouds spilling in with some outbreaks of rain and hill snow edging in during the day. For many, Saturday's dry and fine with sunny spells, and it'll stay that way across much of Scotland, northern and eastern England. But further west, we will see wet weather coming in. It will be mostly rain at low levels, but some snow likely over the hills of Wales and Northern Ireland. And that wintry mix with further snow likely over northern England and parts of Scotland on Saturday night. Goodbye.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, I'm Michael Portillo. You can join me every Sunday on GB News. Remember to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel and to download the GB News app to stay up to date with the latest GB News content. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Several people have been killed after a gunman opened fire in northern Germany last night.
Good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock on Friday, the 10th of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie. These are your top stories this morning.
And a quick warning, the following does contain flashing images. Now, as many as 8 people have been killed and multiple others have been injured in Germany after a gunman stormed a Jehovah's Witness hall. Our Home and Security editor Mark White will be joining us to bring you up to date.
With details of the new immigration bill emerging this week, the Prime Minister is now heading to Paris for talks with his French counterpart, amongst other things, talking about the small boats crisis.
Well, this comes as our GB News People's poll reveals the majority of voters agree with the government and think those arriving illegally across the Channel should be removed from the UK and blocked from returning. We'll be digesting that and much more from our polling throughout the morning.
And of course, we would love to hear from you. You're getting in touch about just about everything this morning. We'll run through some of those. We're with you right through till 10 this morning, so loads of time to get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
We start this morning with some breaking news overnight. Local reports say at least 8 people have been killed in a shooting at a Jehovah's Witness meeting hall in northern Germany. Police there say the incident happened at around 9 p.m. last night, and they believe the gunman acted alone and is thought to be dead.
OK, let's get the latest from Mark White, our Home and Security editor, who's here. What do we know then this morning, Mark?
Well, they're still trying to sort of piece together the exact sequence of events. We know that it happened, as you say in your introduction there, just after 9 o'clock local time. A number of people have been gathering in this building, we believe, for Bible class when shots rang out. Now, the building itself is only about half a mile or so away from the main police headquarters in Hamburg, so local officers were quickly on scene, followed by these specialist firearms officers who were able to push their way into the building really quite quickly, and they, discovered an absolutely horrifying sight of multiple gunshot victims. Some people had already succumbed to their injuries. Others who were still alive, they effectively just carried them out to waiting medics on the street as they then continued their search in the building. Now, they heard another gunshot as they were inside the building ring out. They went upstairs in that building and found a person who had died up there. They believe that person was the gunman who, it's understood, took their own lives. This is what a police spokesman said in the early hours of this morning.
The police were relatively close by and then went into the building quite quickly. The police officers who went in found people who may have been seriously injured by firearms, some of them fatally. The officers also heard a shot from the upper part of the building and went upstairs, where they also found a person. So far, we have no indication that any perpetrators fled. We now have to carry out the evaluation of the crime scene. At the moment, we have no clues about the victims. All we know is that several people have died here. Several people have been injured. They have been taken to hospitals. I cannot give any information on the background at the moment. This is all still speculation. All we know is that the event took place this evening. In what framework and what the tenor of the event was is still unclear. It happened in a building of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but the reasons are still completely unclear.
Stattgefunden, aber die Hintergründe sind noch komplett unklar.
Well, as we just heard there, we are at the start of this investigation. Do we know anything so far about a possible motive?
No, not really, and I think we probably best be circumspect about this. We know, of course, that over recent years in countries around the world, Christian associated buildings have been attacked by Islamist extremists. But in this particular case, the gunman is believed to have taken their own lives inside the building. It doesn't necessarily follow the pattern of Islamist extremists who, may be involved in a confrontation with police officers at the scene, go on maybe to commit other attacks or just flee the scene. So the police are telling people not to speculate. It's possible that the the gunman was known to those inside this building. We will, I'm sure, find that out in the fullness of time, because they will know the identity of this individual now. As far as locals are concerned, clearly a shocking episode for them. We spoke to a number of eyewitnesses who really were quite consistent with the story, talking about the fact that there were short bursts of gunfire ringing out, which seemed to be consistent with someone working their way from room to room looking for victims. This is what one eyewitness told us.
We heard gunshots. I know what gunshots sound like. And there are 12 continuous shots. I thought it was something at the construction site here, but then it's supposed to have been somehow at the petrol station or next door at the Jehovah's Witnesses. We took some pictures and saw people being taken away in black bags. That's all we saw. We didn't see any perpetrators or anything like that, but only what happened here shortly afterwards.
So the investigation goes on this morning, Mark, and it's going to be certainly initially a pretty grim forensic job, isn't it?
Yeah, and a protracted forensic job as well. They're going through methodically, as you would expect, room by room of this building, just to piece together the exact sequence of events. And of course, they're aided by the fact that they are not looking for another suspect. They believe the suspect took their own lives. So they will now, as a priority, be working on who this individual is, what their motivation could have been, and was this person known to those who died. But yeah, a terrible, shocking event.
OK. Mark, for now, thanks very much.
Thank you. Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is set to meet French President Emmanuel Macron today in Paris. It will be the first summit between both countries in 5 years.
Well, they are expected to agree, that's good news, on a joint drive to prevent migrants crossing the Channel in small boats, all through a multi-year financing plan.
Well, this would mean Britain would pay millions of pounds to France yearly to ramp up patrols on French beaches. So, what is Macron's price?
Let's talk to former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Mellor. Good morning to you, David.
Good morning.
Whatever comes out in terms of detail, this is a step towards entente cordiale. That's got to be positive, hasn't it?
Yes, I think that it's been a bad patch for Anglo-French relations, because Macron took offence at Boris, and Boris took offence at Macron, as, to be fair, a lot of us do. Sunak is obviously a much better diplomat. He's a much better person to create a warm surroundings to a difficult discussion. I think that what Macron wants out of this is to see a coming together of the two most powerful European powers in the best interests of Europe as it faces up to the ongoing, and some would even say growing, threat from Putin.
David, can I interrupt you to take us we'll come back to all of this.
Yeah.
But what I want to bring, because I know you will have a view on this, we're just hearing from the palace that the Duke of Edinburgh title, they have made a decision on that now, and the Duke of Edinburgh will be Prince Edward.
Yes,
which is what it's what people were expecting in a way. But this is positive news, isn't it?
Yes, because Prince Edward is a thoroughly decent man. His wife is one of the hardest working of the royals, as he is. The Queen was particularly in favour of her, and it's good that someone who doesn't try to project a big public image, but who gets on with it, is really getting recognised. And the reason it took them so long, I think, was that there was a pushback in certain quarters that he shouldn't be the Duke of Edinburgh. So that's good.
Yeah. No.
We have a statement from them as well, which says the new Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh are proud to continue Prince Philip's legacy of promoting opportunities for young people of all backgrounds to reach their full potential. And that's
positive.
Really lovely, isn't it? Really, that is that legacy that's going to be brought on through the next generation.
Harmony in that part of the royal family, at least. But I suspect not much harmony coming up in France. You see, it seems, I don't think the French regard these small boats as a big issue for them. They see it as a big issue for us. And the question is, in order to get what they want, which is a greater understanding between Britain and France on the wider NATO issues, are they prepared to make concessions? It seems to me, look, there are three elements to this. And I don't see Britain getting home on more than one of them, and maybe not even that. The first thing is we have to identify and stop these people leaving France in the first place. Now, we've tipped a lot of money in the direction of the French police. It hasn't worked. They talk about boots on the ground. I think the only way we're going to do that is if British officers are stationed in France and play some part in preventing them leaving. Now, when they arrive on the beaches, there is one thing that the British government has been lamentable in failing to deal with, and that is to keep them out of the hands of ambitious, politically motivated lawyers so that they enter the British legal system. There is no reason why someone who chooses to become an uninvited guest should get all of the protection, the extensive protection that's offered by the law, and it would be good if that went. But the real problem is, let's say we ban them and say you're not allowed in here and you can't go to the courts. They're still here. So how are you going to actually get rid of them?
Well, that picks up on what Stephen Kinnock was saying to us earlier on, the shadow immigration minister, because he was saying, well, you can't really do anything until you get the returns policy in place, which is a valid point. But what struck me from what he was saying, because it's such a political hot potato at the moment, is that he seemed to be saying, yes, if there was a returns policy in place, then yes, if people land illegally, get them back out again, which to me almost seemed like he was backing government policy.
Well, yes, but if the French won't take them back, you see, these people are often stateless. You see, look...
But doesn't that where Rwanda comes in?
Yeah, but I never thought that was going to happen. I hope I'm wrong, but Mystic Miller confidently predicts Rwanda won't work. But the real problem, as we all know, is that if you haven't got anywhere to send these people, they have to stay with us. And the government's got to be able to crack that. Hopefully, you see, this whole thing is this argument is based on myth. The myth is that these people are somehow in desperate need of help, and therefore it's our duty and obligation to help them. They're not in desperate need of help. The whole idea of the treaties that deal with refugees is that is the place they have to go, because if they don't go to that place, they've got real life and death problems, but they don't. You know, France is a perfectly safe place for them to be.
Well, it depends. I mean, of the 33,000 that travelled between January and September last year, the majority were from Albania, which we know is a safe country. Many would be economic migrants, yes. But then there were 4,000 from Afghanistan.
But they're criminals. Let's be quite clear about this.
Well, not
Albania, a lot of them are. And one of the reasons why there was this huge jump is Albania is the place. If you want an organised drugs gang, Albania is where you'll get one, and they desire to take over the whole of the European drugs thing, and that's why we can't afford to lose this
But then, if you let me continue, so
sorry,
that's fine. But I'm just to provide some balance. Yes, the majority come from Albania, but then almost 5,000 came from Afghanistan, which we know has had a terrible time in the last few years. Iran, which we know women especially are under threat from the morality police there. Iraq, Syria. So, I mean, do you think there needs to be more legal routes, more legal ways in which people who are genuine asylum seekers, not economic migrants, but they can apply for asylum and come here safely? Because many of these people who are genuine refugees and asylum seekers are being lumped in with these criminals, and it's not all the same.
No, I agree with you, and of course we do let people in through a legitimate route, but what we're dealing with here are queue jumpers. Queue jumpers who will often lie about where they say they came from.
But yeah, I mean, it's this odd situation, isn't it, that if no one's got any documentation and they are genuine, how do you get them into the, how do you, legitimately get the right people into the country? I guess it's all about getting processing centres on the other side of the channel, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's got to be taken back across to France. But the real problem is getting people in who we need. This country has real needs for skilled, qualified, hard-working people. most of them, I'm sorry to say, are not the ones who jump off boats, who are usually young, single men without skills. We got plenty of young single men without skills, without importing them from overseas.
What are we to make in our People's poll this morning, David? And no surprise, it shows that 52% support the government's policy when it comes to immigration. That's no great shocker. But when you look at the national poll, Labour's lead has dropped below 20%, which some people may be cheering at. Still 19%, so it's a big gap, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, but I would not rule out the Tories making more of a comeback, but that must depend on whether Sunak can continue to show a credibility in dealing with these issues, and if people like Boris just get out of his hair, I mean, really. But when it comes down to it, I don't think that we're going to find that the Labour Party are capable of sustaining the kind of pressure that Blair did in 1997, and you feel with the Labour front bench, they're not very good at being persuasive on these issues. I mean, they were all over the place on what they did with illegal migrants, and so. If Sunak is given a good run at this and is backed up by the right people, I think it's not all over. It's only the fat lady has not yet sung.
It's interesting. You get slightly nervous every time they talk about, is the quiet man, the quiet prime minister. I sort of have judders because that never worked for IDS, did it? I mean, they went the opposite direction. But are we seeing a policy where the quiet man getting on with it is actually starting to have an impact?
Well, a quiet, charming man who hopefully has the resolution. I thought that his handling of the Northern Ireland situation, a position created for him by Boris, who just wasn't bothered enough about the detail and just wanted an agreement, and if it fell apart, too bad. And I think the fact that he was called Dear Rishi by it's quite. I think that what he has to do is avoid being distracted. He's got to make sure that the ministers he's got do not themselves cause him embarrassment. And we know there are a number who are already doing so or poised to do so. And he's got to try to allow the focus to be on what he can bring to the party. He's a technocrat. There's nothing wrong with a technocrat if you are contrasting a technocrat with, a dishonest blowhard like Boris.
Oh, well, of course, many people would say he's not dishonest and he was the person that they wanted in number 10.
But he won't leave. He doesn't want to give up until all his family have been ennobled in some way.
Oh, well, no, that does seem to be the case, but there you go.
Cheap point, but I love cheap point.
David, really good to see you this morning. Thank you very much. We've got to move on, David, because our reporters are standing out in the cold this morning.
Yes, snowstorms have swept across large parts of the UK, with the Met Office issuing amber warnings for strong winds and heavy snow. Yeah, temperatures last night, the coldest reported in March for a decade. Parts of North Wales and the northeast of England also getting, wait for this, 40 centimetres of snow. Yes, significant disruption to transport and phone network coverage is expected throughout the day in the areas hit hardest by the cold front. OK, well, we can head across the country to our reporters, Tony Maguire, who's in Scotland, Paul Hawkins, who's in Halifax. Paul, let's go to you first of all, because that's where it looks the worst.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, Stephen. That is the worst. Reckon there's about 10 inches of snow here today, and it has been falling throughout the night. And this road, really quiet. So people are heeding that advice finally not to try and travel in your car. This road, the A629 just outside Halifax, it has been gritted and ploughed. The main roads are OK for cars, but it's those smaller roads that are causing the problem, the driveways in people's cars. Just have a look at this. This is where we stayed overnight, actually, an emergency booking at the Windmill Court Hotel. And look, the car, we've helped push this car from here to here. It's taken us about the last 20 minutes. So that's the problem, really. The main roads are okay, but it's a case of trying to negotiate those smaller roads, or just not bothering, to be honest, and staying at home. The temperature at the moment, about 0 degrees. The snow now moving away from North Wales. It stopped in Northern Ireland, and it's going to head away from the Midlands as we go through the day, away from the Pennines, down towards the southeast of England. They'll see a few flurries later, and we're actually going to get sunshine this afternoon. It's going to be absolutely stunningly beautiful here, but of course when you get sunshine and you get that lack of cloud cover, it means that in the morning you're going to get that really biting frost. So temperatures here, they were hovering around 0 degrees overnight, but tonight they're going to be down to -7, which means of course you've got the threat of all that snow freezing overnight, making driving conditions probably more dangerous tomorrow morning in the Pennines, around the Yorkshire Dales, than they would have been this morning. So still some treacherous driving conditions out there today and tomorrow. Schools, as you can imagine, are closed. There were problems on the M62 overnight. People were stuck in their cars. There are certain sections of the M62 travelling towards West Yorkshire from Manchester that are still closed. So you need to check before you travel on those main roads, if indeed you are going to travel. And there are cancellations as well, some delays at Birmingham Airport, although the runway there has just reopened, and also at John Lennon Airport in Liverpool. So yeah, some disruption across sort of that middle part of the country today, but as ever, there is a big temperature range difference across the country. Many parts of the UK, of course, waking up and it's just wet this morning.
It's certainly not wet where you are. It looks like a winter wonderland, but I'm sure it certainly doesn't feel it. You've had a very dramatic overnight stop there. So, Paul, go get warm, have a cup of tea. And Tony, you're in Scotland for us. How's it looking there? It looks a lot brighter, it must be said.
Yeah, well, I thought I came prepared this morning. I got my parka, got my scarf and my gloves. What I really should have packed was my Factor 50 sunscreen. Certainly this morning in Glasgow, lovely blue sky. I would say in some parts of the city on higher ground we got a few inches, but the majority of the city received a light dusting. So it certainly seems somewhere along the way Scotland and England, or should I say England lost a bit to Scotland, and this time England gets the worst of the snow, and Wales too, of course. But that's not to say that it's not heavy in some parts of the country. Up in the northeast, certainly a couple of the ski centres are reporting that they finally have fresh powder and open up at Licht in the Cairngorms. Meanwhile, over in the west coast, the Nevis Range and Glencoe, not quite enough snow, which is obviously a complete switch reversal of what we're seeing in the Central Belt. So certainly today it looks like it's going to be a lovely day, and this weather is going to continue over the weekend.
Lovely. Tony, thanks very much indeed. We better go back to Paul, because he has been very well looked after, Paul, haven't you, in your little emergency stop there at the windmill?
Yep. Just want to say a big thank you to David and Gillian, big GB News viewers who looked after us last night. When we got in, they'd already closed the restaurant, but they reopened it for us, cooked us a nice meal, nice breakfast, and they looked after us. So, yeah, it's good. In times like this, communities stick together, don't they?
Yeah, they do. That's a nice part of all this sort of thing. You do get communities sticking together. Thanks both very much indeed. And if you're in one of those areas and you've got elderly relatives or elderly neighbours or what have you, or people who are a bit more vulnerable, or anyone who's disabled who might need a helping hand, pop round, just check everyone's all right.
Yeah. Oh, it is lovely, isn't it? I mean, even just helping each other with the cars and pushing them up the hill. I mean, it is, as Paul says, when a community comes together.
That's the nice
thing. Snow
thing.
brings us together, doesn't it?
It does, it does. You're not all coming together on childcare. We're talking about in the papers, because it looks like Rishi Sunak may be providing a bit more money for some childcare. There are various caveats. Rob, you're on a theme, Rob, with what a lot of people are saying this morning. So you give parents nursery care, breakfast clubs, free dinners, after-school clubs. When younger, we decided we could not afford to have children, so we didn't have any. A comment was made on your show that unless more cash is made available to help, people could not have a second child. Why aren't we telling people to pay for their own offspring?
Yeah, and it's a similar theme here from Michael and Mark. Michael says it's not the state's job to fund your childcare. If you cannot afford children, don't have them. And Mark says, why should childcare be paid for by other taxpayers? It's your choice if you have a child, and it should be your cost.
And a quick one from Pat, who says, I believe mums who wish to stay at home with their babies should be given a grant to enable them to do so. We don't value stay-at-home mothers enough. And I think whether you think we should pay a grant to them or not, almost beside the point. And stay-at-home mums, I think, are like precious.
Oh,
I think they're really
are.
precious, and I think it's a lovely time to spend with your children. I just think a lot of people can't afford to do it.
No, and you made the point before we came on air this morning that many people now couldn't survive on one salary.
No.
I mean, if you want to have children, 2 of you need to be working. I mean, that's the reality, isn't
But then you end up forking out a lot of that money for childcare. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
In some cases, you're paying to go to work because your childcare is more than your salary.
It's all very
So,
much, isn't
yeah.
it? Anyway, if you've got
Expensive.
any views on that, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We've got much more coming up for you, including a bit more sport in just a few minutes.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you
I'll
are.
put that as my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
OK, let's take you straight to Paris, should we? Where the Prime Minister has arrived. I think he's at the Elysee Palace, though I could be wrong. I don't think that is the Elysee Palace, is it? But anyway, so he's in Paris. He's going to be talking, and he's not there on his own, is he? Because the Foreign Secretary's over there. I think the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is there. Talk about the Home Secretary Suella Braverman being there as well. But anyway, it's this Anglo-French summit, first time in 5 years. that has happened. And it's all about building relations with France. The key to that, of course, as far as perhaps most people in the UK are concerned, is what agreements will they come to over the migrant issue and the small boat crossings?
Does look like some movement there, and you can see the security, huge amount of security. The French police are out in force for that meeting today, UK-France summit. Significant, isn't it? The first in 5 years. They will certainly be looking to put on a united front and share the things that we have in common. There's some of the papers today and online are calling it a bromance between Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron.
Which it's a bit of a laughing matter, is that? I don't know. But actually, it's not a bad thing. I know there's been a lot of bad blood over the last few years, but we're not going to get... It's diplomacy, isn't it? We're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to be able to get what we want and need unless we work together. That's going to be that's the issue, isn't it? But it's still going to be at the end of the day, we'll be told there's been some fantastic things agreed. Whether it's going to be anywhere near enough, the Labour Party says no, because they're not going to get a returns policy. So it looks like, I mean, I could well be wrong there, it looks like this may be a case of sort of out of where they've been staying, is that the British Embassy or what have you, and then heading off to the Elysee Palace for that meeting. So there you go, that's all underway, which is all well and good, and of course we'll bring you all the latest and the arrivals. So with the arrivals, we'll bring you the details of what's happened throughout the day here on the show.
News, on the breakfast show. Tom Harwood is in Paris for us, and he'll keep us updated on that. Migrant issue will be obviously at the top of the agenda. Do keep your views coming in. gbnews@gbnews.uk. Should we be paying France more money? Is it a good thing to see Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron together? Let us know what you think.
Well, we're going to make more progress that way, aren't we? Let's be honest. I just want to bring you a quick update on the shooting in Germany. Happened about 9 o'clock last night. Hamburg police have confirmed now that 8 people are dead, including the gunman. This happened at a Jehovah's Witness building. A prayer meeting was underway when a gunman opened fire and then, it's thought, took their own life in a room near the top when the police arrived on the scene. But 8 people, so at least 7 victims and the gunman dead as a result of what happened last night. That investigation well underway now, but still no motive. Mark White, our home and security editor, is going to keep you updated across the day with coverage of that.
Now, let's have a look at HS2, which is also a big story in the papers today, because the Birmingham to Crewe leg of the high-speed railway is set to be delayed by 2 years to cut costs.
Now, the government said Euston Station's opening could also be delayed as an affordable design is worked on. Let's talk to Bruce Williamson, spokesman for the campaign group Rail Future, who joins us now. What do we make of this, Bruce? I don't know whether it saves money, perhaps, but it gets more and more delayed. What's going to be the point of HS2?
Well, the point of HS2 is it's still needed because for 2 reasons, really. Rail investment is a great driver of economic growth, so it's important for the prosperity of the country. And whilst COVID gave us a little bit of a breathing space in terms of how many people were using the railways, we do have a sort of capacity crunch. We need that extra capacity that HS2 will bring us. So, what's going on here? Will it save costs? Actually, no, it won't, because delaying the project just, adds costs, really, in the long term. But it's a kind of government accounting trick. So they don't want to spend so much money this year. They'll defer it to next year and the year after. And then, creative accounting, I think it's an example of, but it's not good news.
I mean, some would say that we should scrap HS2 altogether. And since COVID, the way that people work has changed. Many don't need to commute into London the way in which they did before. So this London-centric model of these lines coming into London perhaps isn't necessary anymore. And it also referenced the cost, ballooning from 33 billion a decade ago to now an estimated 100 billion today. I mean, should it be scrapped altogether, or has there been too much investment so far?
Yeah, I think if you'll forgive the pun, it is really too far down the line. So much has been invested, both politically and financially. Those tunnels already being built and so on. I mean, you make the point that people are working from home, and yeah, things will never be quite the same again. But those sort of underlying factors, whatever they are, that have driven up rail passenger use over the years, they haven't gone away, and they haven't, they're not going to go away. Passenger numbers are continuing to rise, and they will do in the future. So if we scrap HS2, we will have a major problem with, just not enough trains available. We will be turning people away at the platform because the trains are full, or we'll have to price them off the railways more than we're doing at the moment. And neither of those is a good thing.
OK, Bruce, really good to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. Appreciate it. Apologies, sound quality a little bit crackly there. But we got the gist of what Bruce was saying. Just want to update you as well on some breaking news that we had this morning from the Palace about the Duke of Edinburgh, who is now Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, which I think is really nice. Apparently that was always the plan. So going back decades, that was always meant to be the plan, but then it all seemed to have come into question a little bit since Her Majesty the Queen passed away. But anyway, it's all been confirmed now, so there will now be a Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh.
Which is really lovely.
And it's nice.
It's a birthday present from the King to
yes,
the new Duke of Edinburgh, the Prince Edward,
59.
on his 59th birthday. So it's a birthday present. And it's being received very well, it must be said.
Oh, well, what's he going to give my mother? My mother's birthday is today.
Well,
Happy
you need to give her a
birthday, Mum.
title, don't you? Happy birthday. What's her name?
Linda.
Happy birthday, Linda.
Lady Linda of
Lady Linda
Drydale or something.
Drydale. That's quite nice.
Yeah.
Got a ring to it, I think.
There you go. Very nice too. Well, it's a birthday present and a half, isn't it, being
That
Duke
is a
of
birthday
Edinburgh?
present and a half.
Very nice too.
And we've had their reaction here, which is the new Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh are proud to continue Prince Philip's legacy of promoting opportunities for young people of all backgrounds to reach their full potential. Very nice.
Yeah, it is nice. Now, coming up, we're going to be talking first dates. How much do you reveal on a first date? So we're talking to an expert and also talking to Stephanie and Aidan, because Aidan's goes a few first. We'll find out more in a minute.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie, and time now.
Sorry, I was just looking at a tweet from Sue Earnshaw who said, "You've just shown Rishi arriving in Paris. I'm sure I saw Tom Harwood being shuffled along. So did I." It is camel coat, Sue. You were quite right. I spotted that.
He's right in the thick of it, is our Tom Harwood, and he'll be bringing us all the updates on that Anglo-French summit, the first in 5 years. He'll be bringing that to us throughout the day.
Anyway, more importantly, sport and showbiz with Aidan McGee and showbiz queen Stephanie Tetchy. Good morning.
Good morning.
Should we talk Oscars? Because you've got your gold Oscar eyeshadow on.
I know. I just wish I was in LA at the moment. But obviously, I'm with my favourite people. So all roads lead to Tinseltown this weekend, and it's going to be the 95th Oscar Awards, and it's going to be full of drama. Well, we're hoping not as much drama as last year with Will Smith and the slap against Chris Rock. But guys, this could be the last Oscars where we see Best Actress and Best Actors being awarded. As we know, in most award shows, they've been moving towards gender neutrality and non-binary categories. So reports have been breaking that basically for next year, they're planning to ditch Best Actress and Best Actor, which I personally feel will be like the nail in the coffin for the Oscars, because they've already had dwindling figures. When you think about the Oscars, people like the traditional categories. And so to get rid of those categories, it means, like we've seen with the Brits, potentially women could be snubbed, or even men themselves. So it's going to be quite a controversial move. And in a way to make the industry more diverse next year, in order to be, win Best Picture, you're going to have to make sure that 30% of your cast are from underrepresented categories or from ethnic minorities.
Is that what, you're being serious?
Yeah, that's natural. There's going to be a quota next year in order for the film to be put forward for Best Picture.
OK, we could break in just for a second because Rishi Sunak is just arriving now at the Elysee Palace. I've got the pictures. Here we go. So there he is. Well, that's not... Who's that?
That's James Cleverly.
That's James Cleverly we spoke to this morning. And clearly not Rishi Sunak in that car, but Rishi Sunak's probably the next one. But there you go. So arriving at the Elysee Palace to meet Emmanuel Macron. And it is thought that they will reach an agreement on small boat crossings, and possibly in this multi-year financial deal where we will pay several £100 million a year to increase policing on the beaches, to have more British police over there as well, we would imagine, which might sound like an expensive way of doing it. It's a drop in the ocean in real terms, money for governments and things. But it is a possibility that this can be stopped. You might say, well, we've given them money already. Has it worked? We're told, yes, it has. James Cleverly, who you see there, told us this morning that they've stopped 50% of those trying to cross the channel in small boats this year so far. So that's about 3,000 people they think they've stopped so far.
It was hoped that they were going to discuss a returns policy, so the French would agree to take back migrants who had made their way across the Channel to the United Kingdom. It doesn't look as though that will be agreed on.
No.
The French have said that's going to need to go to the EU, that's going to need to be agreed by them, but there could be more boots on the ground. That is what we're expecting them to talk about, but that will, of course, cost money. Let us know what you think about that, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and, of course, we'll keep you updated on that Anglo-French summit as it takes place this morning.
We certainly will. Talking of returns policy, that never happened at the Oscars with Will Smith's Oscar, did it?
No,
he managed to keep hold of it.
Yeah, he did, but he certainly will not be attending this year because
No.
he's been banned for the next 10 years, so he won't be making an appearance, which is a shame, but yeah.
Isn't that strange, though? It's going to be one of the best things about the Oscars this year will be just if there's no controversy.
Well, yeah, they've got a crisis team now that they've hired, which...
You want a bit of controversy, don't you?
No, not like
Well, I think
that.
that's what people want to see, actually. I think that actually made people more interested in
More interested in some of the films.
Well,
yeah.
But no, just getting back to your point a minute ago, though, you said that there's been a drop-off in interest. Is it for the reasons you're describing, or are there other factors involved?
You're right. I think what's happening with the Oscars trying to be more woke and trying to be more PC, people are bored of that because we're seeing that in so many awards now where they're stripping the fun of it, they're stripping out the tradition. And if you want people to be interested, you know what the saying is, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So, you know, it'll be
What do you reckon
interesting.
to all of that, Aidan? I mean, I wouldn't mind them swapping it about so that because it often not ends on, but because that's the best picture, isn't it? But you know, best actor is sort of put nearer the end than best actress. Yeah, swap it all around and things.
That would be fine, but I just think again, what's going to happen next year? We'll be sitting here and we'll be talking about the big debate of the lack of women who've been, you know, voted in.
But that's it. Everyone loses, don't they? Ultimately, because there's fewer awards, so fewer people are going to win, so fewer actors will have an Oscar, fewer actors.
That's why we, you know, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah,
we might want a bit of controversy back instead of talking about this.
Well, maybe they should have first and second place.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Get a little gold Oscar and a silver Oscar.
Oh, silver Oscar. That sounds nice.
You're getting into a whole new territory then, aren't you? Bronze Oscars.
But that might work, though.
Yeah, maybe.
Makes it a bit more sporty.
Yeah, it does a little bit, yeah. Talking of which.
It does a bit,
Yeah, talking of
Then,
which.
what have you got to look forward to?
Man United. Last night, really good performance, beat Real Betis 4-1.
Yeah.
You'll know that they lost 7-0. Steph knows this, she's a United fan. Lost 7-0 at Liverpool last weekend. The Europa League is a second-line European tournament. You normally would make significant changes in between Premier League games because your priority, your bread and butter, is the Premier League. He didn't do this, Erik ten Hag, the manager. He decided to play exactly the same 11 that lost to Liverpool in the game last night to say, right, atone for that at the weekend. Yes, they did, 4-1. I do think it's a bit foolhardy because they've got games coming up, same as Arsenal. Arsenal drew 2-2 last night in Portugal. This is the thing, it's a nuisance in some ways, this tournament, because not only is it extra games, but it's Europe, therefore you have to travel, and the travel makes a big difference. Ask any sports scientist what weighs heavy on a player. It's the travel, it's the amount of time they spend in the air, it's the amount of time they spend in coaches and everything else, and trains and everything else. So it's a bit of a nuisance. Arsenal, in contrast to Man United, made 6 changes. In the context for this United game, I don't remember us talking about Brentford earlier in the season when they beat Man United 4-0. He calculated, Erik ten Hag, that Brentford ran 8 miles longer or more than Manchester United did in that defeat, and he made them run. Oh no, it's easy. You can do it by tracking vests. It's basic. But he made them run 8 miles the next day. Just to make up for it. And so there's an element of this theory. He's one of these guys who says, right, you make a mistake, here's your chance to atone for it. There's a lot of disciplinarian, headmasterish feel about him, actually. They don't mess around.
Do you think people were questioning his managerial skills after that?
Well, it was a test. Oh, yeah. You can't... Listen, questions are asked everywhere when you lose 7-0 away to Liverpool, I have to say. And I think the players who played in that game will carry that for quite some time. But the beautiful thing with football is that you only have a few days away from getting a game to atone for it, and that's exactly what's happened with United last night and this weekend when they play Southampton.
Yeah. OK, look, on that note, we've got to leave it.
Thank you, guys.
Let's just take you back to Paris. And there's Emmanuel Macron on the steps of the Élysée Palace, which one would only presume that he stood there waiting for Rishi Sunak to walk up the steps, you would imagine, because he is the key guest. So one would imagine that's happening, and the salutes are all underway, and the swords are up, and what have you. And I love the regalia of it all, actually. Yeah. And presumably, if that's not Rishi Sunak walking up, I'd want to know who it is.
Well, it is significant, isn't it? This is the first Anglo-French summit in 5 years. I mean, things have been tense, haven't they? It looks as though Rishi Sunak is arriving now in a flag-bearing vehicle there, and he's just about to step out.
There he goes.
That's Rishi Sunak.
So, and there's meant to be this bromance between the two, a handshake, pat on the shoulder, another handshake. There you go. So it all looks very warm and very friendly, and you know, whether you like all this or not, that's the way it's got to be. If they're going to make any progress diplomatically, or pats on the back and all the rest of it.
Back rubbing there.
So it all looks very positive, posing for pictures. So it's now what they come out of this with, and hopefully it is going to be at least further agreement on the small boat crisis. Not as far as the UK would like to go. They've already acknowledged they're not going to get a return deal on all of this, where we can send people back to France. But steps in the right direction.
And
there
very
you go.
cosy body language, it must be said, stepping into the Elysee Palace there, but hands on each other's backs. It certainly looks very, very cosy. They will want to be seen, won't they, to be collaboratively working together. It has been tense the past 5 years with the fishing row and several other issues, including the migrant crisis. That will certainly be top of their agenda this morning. The meeting is only half an hour long. It's not actually very long.
No.
But I think a lot of it is this new chapter, isn't it, in Anglo-French relations and getting back on track. And it certainly looks off to a positive start there, doesn't it?
All the work's been done beforehand. This is like the rubber seal, isn't it? But it's still, it's a positive thing. It's got to be a positive thing if we get out of it what the government wants to. It's not going to be enough, says the Labour Party, but we shall wait and see. Now, anyway, away from that, because that's a bromance, what about a romance in all of this and a proper first date? Do you remember your first dates? If you're still doing them, oh, good luck with all that. It's horrific, isn't it? It's a terrifying time. So what do you do to make a first date work? Because we're not open enough about ourselves, apparently. We're hiding our little quirky bits and bobs, as it were. Let's talk to dating coach and relationship expert Jo Barnett, who's here in the studio. Good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
So what are people doing wrong on first dates?
There's been a lot of controversy about not being yourself. And what's important on a first date is that someone gets to know you. And when you talk about your passions, your interests, your hobbies, you're revealing what matters and how you like to spend your time. So all of that is important, rather than just sitting there trying to say what you think someone wants to hear.
But isn't first date about impressing someone? Or should you have done that before you arrange to go and have a first date?
There's a bit of a difference between impressing and giving a good first impression.
Yeah, OK.
Yeah? So you want to come across friendly and warm and open, you know, good body language, good eye contact, smiling. But you also want to be authentic and true to you, because otherwise they're not going to know if you're suitable. You're not going to know if you're suitable. So there's a fine line between honesty, authenticity, and making a good first impression.
Are there any faux pas? Are there any no-go areas that you would say are off-limits on a first date? Because I was talking to a friend the other day who goes on lots of first dates, and she was saying she was talking about the traumas of her past relationships, and she's now decided she's not going to do that.
What, talking about that on a first date?
On a first date, and she says she thinks it really scares them off.
Not, and it would scare them off. You know, if I say to people, don't bring up anything negative, anything that's going to trigger you. It's not a therapy session. It's fun, it's light-hearted. Imagine you were going out with a friend, and if they're having a good time, you're having a good time. So, like, relax, get to know them, and don't talk about problems, ill health. Don't get involved in anything that's going to aggravate you. Keep it light and talk about your hobbies.
But in terms of those things that we are currently keeping quiet, our little quirks, I mean, there's a survey out today that is saying that apparently we're more attracted to people who own their quirks rather than try to hide them. Is that because, are we looking for individuality? Is that the thing?
Well, when you think about it, there's so much choice out there. You know, you go on any dating app, there's thousands of people. So you are looking for an individual, and you're looking for someone who's memorable. So if you give away something like, in my spare time, I do gaming, or, you know, my secret hobby is I love cartoons, or those kind of quirks, it can be endearing and it can show your fun and playful side. So although people might be embarrassed if they've got what they call quirky hobby, sharing it shows that you have different layers to you. So I don't think you should hide those things. I think it's good to reveal more about who you are.
Yeah.
And what are your first date tips then? What makes for a perfect first date?
You know, it really is about connection. You've got to build that connection. And the thing that's really important is 50-50. So you want to be talking 50% of the time, you want to be listening. And you want
sorry, I
them
thought you were
to
talking
talk.
about the bill. I assumed you were talking about the bill when you said, I was going, oh, yes.
You've got to go Dutch.
We're back to the bill. No, I think that's an individual choice. You know, personally, I think the man should offer. I think the lady can offer. And I would like the guy to refuse, personally, because I think that's romantic. I think it shows that someone cares. But it's very individual, you know. So 50-50 is making sure that you're talking and listening in equal amounts.
Yeah.
Don't let someone monopolise the evening.
Yeah, well, no, I think that's very good advice. Jo, really good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. So that's moving forward then. Don't let anyone monopolise the conversation.
No, and go Dutch if you want.
So I need to change how we work then, is what I'm thinking.
No, I think we do very
Because,
well.
you know, I'm very lucky if I get a word in. But anyway, I'll try harder tomorrow. I'll see if I can keep her a little bit more quiet tomorrow. Don't go anywhere. Esther and Phil are here. Esther's in charge.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from